The story begins with Cassia, a 28-year-old lady lying on her bed due to her critical condition. She is troubled by thoughts of her children, Rael and Lucy, and fears that her financial resources will not be sufficient to secure a bright future for them. Dozen years ago, during the war between the Simone Empire and the Burt Empire, there was a commoner mercenary named Zester. He was employed by the imperial family and did a great service in the battle. The emperor wished to reward him with an honorable title. Zester was only awarded the title of baron alongside a plot of land named Grease. The emperor also married off Zester and Cassia. Cassia was once praised as the most eligible bachelorette in all of the empire thanks to her beauty and status as a count's first daughter. Cassia traveled to Greece dreaming of a happy marriage, but her marriage was nowhere close to loving. Cassia's husband, Zester, wasn't just fighting for the emperor's wars but also other nobles' wars. He accepted any job as long as it meant money. There was never a moment when he remained inside the castle and properly took care of people in his territory, nor his family. Throughout their 10-year marriage, Zester never once expressed love or affection towards Cassia. Nevertheless, she found comfort in the presence of their children, Rael and Lucy, who remained by her side. But now, as Cassia faces the prospect of leaving them behind forever, she worries about their well-being without her. In the meantime, Zester had left a month ago to aid Viscount Veitch's territorial war. Cassia had refrained from informing her husband about her illness, pondering on whether he would have stayed by her side if she had. However, she had a strong feeling that Zester would not have altered his decision to join the war effort. Cassia finds solace in knowing that there are still people who care enough to shed tears for her. The head butler offers a prayer for her strength, recognizing how much she means to the residents of Greece who love and rely on her leadership. Despite being the one who has governed Greece for all these years, Cassia feels weary and yearns for rest. The door bursts open and Zester rushes in. The maid asks Cassia to share her wishes with Zester, as she always did with the maid. Zester reassures Cassia that she can confide in him about anything. Cassia expresses her desire for a pearl necklace, and Zester appears confused as to why she would need his permission to purchase it. Cassia clarifies that she didn't want to be seen as greedy, taking into account the hard-earned money Zester brings home. However, Zester reassures her that buying a necklace is not an act of greed, and that he works hard to provide for her and their family. Cassia shares her second wish, expressing a longing to visit the capital. Zester responds with a simple, just go, but Cassia hesitates, explaining that with Zester constantly away at war, she can't leave their territory unattended. This realization weighs heavily on Zester, filling him with disappointment in himself. As her third wish, Cassia asks Zester to make a promise that if she were to die, he would not seek a new wife. Zester responds by offering to fulfill her previous wishes of buying her a necklace and taking her to the capital, and then swears that he will never take another wife, as his love for her is eternal. Cassia feels a sense of relief that Zester is finally treating her well. However, her last wish surprises Zester when she hands him the divorce papers. He gazes at Cassia in silence, struggling to understand her sudden request for a divorce. As Cassia coughs up blood and takes her last breath, panic and sadness grip those around her. Zester, overwhelmed by grief, stands up and tears up the divorce papers, refusing to accept them. Cassia awakens, wondering if she is in heaven, only to realize she is back in her room and in her younger self. She assumes she has passed away and returned to heaven in her original appearance. Cassia then prays to God, asking when he will come, but only silence follows. Now, as Cassia takes a closer look at her surroundings, she is shocked to find Zester still sleeping next to her. In disbelief, Cassia lets out a scream and falls out of bed, causing Zester to wake up abruptly and ask about her condition. Cassia is disoriented and disbelieving when she sees Zester sleeping next to her. She asks him what he is doing there, but Zester is just as perplexed. Cassia begins to cry, feeling overwhelmed and harassed by Zester's presence even after death. Despite his handsome appearance, she cannot stand to see him and demands that he disappear. Zester can only remain silent, unsure of how to respond. Cassia begins to question if she's in hell rather than heaven, and she starts to pray fervently for God to take her away immediately. Suddenly, Zester covers Cassia's body with a blanket. As she opens her eyes, Cassia is startled to see Zester's unclothed form. She prays to God to save her from this hellish nightmare. Zester hastily dresses and remarks that Cassia seems to be the kind of person who harbors negative feelings long after an event has occurred. Upon examining the room more closely, Cassia notices that all the decorations are identical to those from the night she arrived in Greece, which leads her to the realization that she has somehow traveled 10 years back in time. Cassia was not fully aware of Zester's accomplishments during the War of the Empires, but she did know that the Emperor was keen on rewarding him. As a war hero, the Emperor chose to reward Zester with the daughter of the Ruberno family, who was known to have immense wealth and power. This was surprising to Cassia as the Emperor had 3 princesses of his own, yet he chose to give away someone else's daughter. Cassia couldn't help but feel resentful towards the Emperor for her misfortunes. However, Cassia also regrets her decision on her first night with Zester. She realizes that Zester didn't force himself upon her that night. In fact, when he was about to leave, Cassia had held on to him and pleaded with him to stay, fearing that if he left, her reputation as the Baroness would be tarnished. And so, they had spent their first night together. As she approaches the dressing table, Cassia catches sight of herself in the mirror and notices that she still has long hair. Memories flood back to the time when she lived in Greece and the land was struck by a catastrophic famine. Desperate for income, the women of Greece began selling their hair to a neighboring viscounty, Vita, which had a thriving wig business. Despite the rarity and high value of her silver hair, Cassia also chose to cut and sell it to support her fellow residents during those trying times. Cassia refuses to repeat the same miserable life she once had. However, realizing that she still has 10 years left until her death, she decides not to struggle anymore and instead live a life of luxury, pushing back her responsibilities. Cassia contemplates the possibility of divorce as Zester has long neglected her. With his failure to express affection or emotion towards her, she feels as if she's merely a wife in name existing solely to manage the castle and produce heirs. Nonetheless, Cassia is struck by the thought of her children and cannot bear the notion of being without Rael and Lucy. This realization prompts her to reconsider her earlier decision to pursue a life of leisure and postpone her obligations. The thought of engaging in intimate relations with Zester once more fills Cassia with reluctance and discontent. Zester has never shown any emotional attachment to her, not even when she was pregnant. Cassia cannot consider divorce since it would entail leaving her children behind. With no solution in sight, she grows increasingly frustrated and opts to take a nap in hopes of clearing her mind. A few moments later, Cassia gathers her resolve and decides to have a discussion with Zester about her decision to no longer be burdened with household responsibilities. As she leaves her room, she coincidentally meets Paul, the butler of Grease Castle. Initially, Paul wants to give Cassia a tour of the castle and help her hire a personal maid, but Cassia prefers to postpone it since she has an urgent matter to discuss with Zester. Paul offers to accompany her to the Baron's study room, and she agrees. As Cassia enters the room, she feels a knot forming in her stomach. Zester greets her with an emotionless expression and asks what she wants. Cassia takes a deep breath and tries to remain composed as she takes a seat. She explains to Zester that she is aware of her responsibilities as the lady of the castle, but confesses that she lacks both the skill and interest in household affairs, which may lead to the ruin of Grease if entrusted with the task. Cassia also reminds Zester that their marriage was not a result of love, but rather a political alliance, and requests to be excused from fulfilling the duties of a traditional wife. Cassia also recalls how, in her previous life, she worked tirelessly without anyone's prompting, and perhaps that's why she died of an unknown disease due to overexertion. Therefore, now she desires nothing more than a comfortable life. Cassia is quite apprehensive about Zester's response to her very selfish request. To her surprise, Zester remains calm and agrees to her request. Worried that he may change his mind later, Cassia seeks reassurance from him. Zester confirms that he won't change his mind but expresses surprise at her sudden change of attitude since yesterday. Zester perceives Cassia as an assertive woman who knows her preferences, and wonders why she didn't refuse him last night if she didn't enjoy it. Cassia explains that her lack of experience left her unsure about her own likes and dislikes, and that she only realized she hated it afterwards. Cassia's confession comes as a shock to Zester, and he is left momentarily petrified. Even after she leaves the room, Zester struggles to come to terms with the fact that while he enjoyed their first night together, Cassia hated it. He feels disappointed in himself for not realizing Cassia's feelings. From Zester's perspective, Cassia is a well-known noblewoman, not only as the first daughter of Count Ruberno, but also renowned for her angelic appearance. Coming from contrasting backgrounds, Zester believes that Cassia deserved to marry into a more prestigious household than his own. Despite this, she must live in the countryside thanks to the Emperor's marriage arrangement. Zester sees Cassia as a highly respected figure whom he could never lay his hands on, while he himself is merely a commoner with a newfound noble title. In the bedroom that night, Zester was consumed by a desire he had never felt before. His mind raced, and he believed that since Cassia was already his wife and appeared to desire the same, he took the daring step of spending their first night together. Now, he comprehends that Cassia did not enjoy the experience, and it was only he who found pleasure in it. This realization leaves him feeling like a terrible person. Abruptly, Paul knocks on the door and seeks permission to converse about the new lady. As Cassia is now the official lady of the castle, Paul intends to progressively delegate his responsibilities to her. He also suggests that she inspect the territory as soon as possible. However, as previously discussed, Zester orders Paul to remain in charge of the housework and explains Cassia's need to adapt to her new surroundings. Paul is taken aback and goes silent for a moment, which even Zester notices from his face. Paul apologizes, saying that he is just a bit surprised because Zester has never been this talkative before, and he didn't think Zester would speak so highly of the lady. Zester feels awkward and says that he will inform them about the inspection schedule later. As Paul is about to leave the room, Zester asks if he can discuss something personal with him. Paul agrees, but as Zester hesitates to ask his question, the atmosphere becomes tense and silent. Eventually, Zester asks about Paul's marital status, and Paul reveals that he is a widower because his wife passed away due to illness. Zester becomes silent again, hesitant to ask his next question, until he nervously requests to be educated on intimacy, considering that Cassia doesn't enjoy it. Paul is surprised by Zester's confession because, as an ex-mercenary, he assumes the Baron should already be familiar with such matters, just like most mercenaries. Paul explains that he doesn't have the proper knowledge to teach, and it would not be appropriate to ask a random person about such a private matter. He remembers a woman who might be able to help the Baron. Zester is hesitant, but Paul reassures him that it will be a theoretical lesson, and he will contact the woman, Lady Fleurette, as discreetly as possible to avoid any misunderstanding. Zester feels uneasy when he hears her name, but ultimately agrees to Paul's suggestion. Lady Fleurette hails from the small, rural territory of Grise, yet she rose to fame and fortune solely through her physical allure. Not only was she a skilled lover, but she possessed the poise, intelligence, and figure that befitted the noble class, making her the most sought-after courtesan in the capital. By selecting only the clients she desired, she amassed enormous wealth from her noble patrons, many of whom would clamor just for the opportunity to hold her hand. Such was her extravagant and opulent lifestyle that she earned the moniker Lady Fleurette, a title typically reserved for daughters of noble families. Yet for Fleurette, it served as a tool to entice foolish noblemen. After a while, Paul successfully invites Lady Fleurette to attend Zester's lesson. However, he is concerned about potential rumors spreading within the palace and the possibility of the Baroness misinterpreting the situation. Therefore, he decides to silence the servant and attend the lessons himself, so he can personally explain the situation to the Baroness if any misunderstandings arise. Paul is headed to meet the Baroness to discuss the issue of her personal servant. Upon receiving permission to enter her chamber, he is taken aback by the sight of the Baroness, and the state she is in leaves him shocked. While chilling on the bed, Cassia is having a great time doing nothing. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door that interrupts her. Paul, the butler, wants to come in and have a chat. When he enters, he's totally surprised by what he sees, thinking Cassia must be freaking out from her first night with Zester. Paul asks Cassia if something's wrong, but she's actually super relaxed and happy for the first time ever. She advises Paul to take a break sometimes because nobody will appreciate him working too hard and neglecting his health. Paul can't believe these wise words are coming from an 18-year-old girl. He explains that he came to ask Cassia which maid she wants, as he wants to train them well. While they're discussing, someone knocks on the door and introduces herself as Vita, wanting to come in. Paul looks annoyed and tells Vita that he's in the middle of a conversation with Cassia. Cassia asks Paul who the woman is and why he's stopping her from saying hello. Paul hesitates to reveal the lady's identity, and Cassia realizes that he's always been trying to hide her existence this whole time. Vita is basically Zester's childhood buddy who's been hanging out with him since they were kids in the same little town. Once Zester became all fancy and noble, Vita scored herself a room in the castle. Zester has this crazy soft spot for her, so everyone calls her Miss Vita and treats her like some high-class lady, even though she's just a regular person without any fancy status. Cassia's mind is blown when she finds out that Zester and Vita are supposedly just pals. She can't help but suspect that Zester brought Vita to the castle to have some sneaky affair right under her nose. Cassia gets off her lazy bum and gives Vita the green light to enter. Now, she's feeling like a total boss, living her second life like it's pure gold. She's figured out exactly who's responsible for all her past misery. In her previous existence, Cassia was just a helpless puppet, dragged around for 2 long years without any power. But now, oh boy, she's out for sweet revenge. This time, nobody's gonna mess with her. The door swings open and in walks Vita, flashing her trademark smile. Everyone knows Vita for her kindness and constant grin. She introduces herself as Vita Berkeley, a true Boheme native who grew up alongside the Baron. Vita opens up about the tough situation back home, with her parents struggling with poor health. But thanks to the Baron's kindness, she found refuge in the castle. Cassia, upon hearing this, can't help but think that Vita should be by her parents' side if they're unwell, rather than being far away. Undeterred, Vita shares that she's been eagerly awaiting Cassia's arrival, hoping they'll become the best of friends since there aren't many people their age in the castle. Cassia, with a hint of suspicion, turns to Paul and wonders if Vita was invited to live in the castle because she's super close to the Baron. Vita clarifies that while they're not related by blood, she and Zester are like siblings, practically joined at the hip. She asks Cassia to treat her as a friend too. Cassia forces a fake smile onto her face, concealing her true thought. Of all the awful folks Cassia can recall, Vita takes the cake as the absolute worst. Zester made a major blunder by not recognizing the clear boundary between nobles and commoners. Vita used to call Zester by his name alone, completely ignoring his noble title. No matter what their past relationship was, Vita should have known her place. Cassia vividly remembers her previous life when Vita falsely accused a maid of seducing Zester. Then she had the audacity to act like she cared about Cassia, claiming that the servants were looking down on her. Vita had the nerve to lecture Cassia on displaying her dignity as the lady of the castle and tried to boss her around. But in reality, nobody did anything wrong. And yet Cassia couldn't say no to Vita's demands. As for Zester, Vita was one of the few people he trusted, believing that Cassia made the choice to dismiss the maids. Since Zester is a good 6 years older than Cassia, she always made it a point to use respectful titles when addressing him. But Vita, that cheeky lady, was the only one in the entire town of Grease who dared to speak to him all casually. She'd pretend it was some kind of slip-up whenever she called Zester by his name, but deep down, Cassia knew she was just playing games. Cassia believes Zester conveniently turned a blind eye to this commoner lady trying to be all buddy-buddy with his own wife. At the time, Cassia was too scared to confront him about it, so she just swallowed her frustrations and went along with it. All this thinking is giving Cassia a massive headache, and Vita notices something's up. Cassia quickly comes up with an excuse, blaming her fatigue from the long journey yesterday, and politely asks Vita to leave for now. Paul escorts Vita to the exit, and she gives a quick glance and bow before leaving. In Cassia's past life, her nightmare with Vita dragged on for a grueling 2 years. It only ended when she became pregnant with Verl. Following her doctor's advice, who was worried about her having a miscarriage, Cassia mustered up the courage to request that Vita, the source of her stress, be kicked out of the castle. And weirdly enough, Vita actually packed her crap and left without much fuss. Talk about an anticlimactic finale for a duo who supposedly couldn't live without each other. But then, just as Cassia was about to step into Zester's room, she freaking hears Vita's voice coming from inside, and that was a serious mind-blower. Now, Cassia's kicking herself for not busting their affair right then and there. This time around, she's dead set on not letting anyone off the hook. She's ready to dig up all their dirty secrets. So, the next day rolls around, and Zester's sitting all stiff in front of Lady Fleurette, while she's racking her brain on where the heck to start the lesson. Zester notices Lady Fleurette's weird expression and straight up asks her what the heck is wrong. She's trying to keep her cool but finally spills the beans, saying it's her first time meeting someone like Zester. Turns out Lady Fleurette is all frustrated because she found out about Zester's wild antics on his first night with Cassia. She goes on to explain that what Zester did wasn't even close to normal marital relations. It was more like some animalistic mating stuff. Zester's mind is blown and he's left totally confused. Then, Lady Fleurette grabs a pen and starts sketching something. Zester's confusion levels skyrocket when he sees the drawing. Lady Fleurette points to some spots on the sketch and tries to explain to Zester what he should do. But instead of getting it, Zester's taken aback and feels like he can't possibly do those things to his wife. They start arguing like crazy. Lady Fleurette insists that it's the way to have enjoyable and healthy intimate relations with Cassia, while Zester thinks her ideas are even more beast-like. He slams his hand on the table, saying that Cassia would totally hate it if he tried anything like that. Losing her patience, Lady Fleurette asks if she can just straight up say what she means, and Zester is left in total shock after hearing her explanation. Alright, let's change the subject now. Cassia had an awesome week of chilling out and stuffing her face, while Zester conveniently stayed out of her frickin' sight. But darn it, Vita just won't leave her alone and keeps yapping about the same old stories Cassia's already heard a million times in her previous life. It's not like she's jealous anymore. She's just gonna bide her time until she can bust them in the act of their sneaky affair. Noticing some random lady coming out of Zester's study, Vita stops her and demands to know who she is. Vita gets all worked up and grabs the lady's shoulder in anger. The lady is covering her face, so Vita's like, "Tell me your name and why the heck you were in Zester's room." Cassia watches the whole scene unfold and gets seriously ticked off at how Vita's treating the poor guest. She tells Vita to back off and let the lady go. But no, Vita insists on seeing the lady's face and takes off the cover like it's some dramatic movie scene. She points her finger at the lady and starts accusing her of being a sleazy prostitute who sells herself to noblemen for money. Vita's all furious and demands an explanation as to why the lady was in Zester's room. And you know what? The lady fires back at Vita, calling her rude and saying she wouldn't be so offended if she was actually getting paid for her troubles. Vita's eyes practically pop out of her head at that response. Then the lady politely greets Cassia to clear up any misunderstandings, and explains that she's only here because the castle butler contacted her about some issue the Baron was dealing with. Cassia gets it and tells the lady that if Paul invited her, then she's totally welcome here. She also tells the lady to have a safe trip back home. But Vita, she's still all salty and sour about it. She watches as the lady turns to leave and then suddenly loses it. She pulls the lady's hair and starts yelling at her to stop. This crazy scene in front of Cassia totally shocks her to the core. She's like, "Vita, stop." But they just keep yanking each other's hair like a couple of maniacs. Cassia's getting super anxious, and just when things are getting really heated, Lady Fleurette starts crying out for Cassia to help. Cassia's like, "Alright, I'm coming." Then, out of nowhere, Lady Fleurette accidentally grabs onto Cassia's dress and throws her off balance. Just as Cassia's about to faceplant, Paul shows up because he hears the whole commotion. And right in the nick of time, Zester swoops in and catches Cassia before she hits the floor. He's all concerned like, "Are you okay?" And Cassia, she's fuming mad, so she shouts back like, "No, I'm not freaking okay." Everybody's just standing there in complete shock, and there's this awkward silence. Cassia takes a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. And then she's like, "Vita, let go of Lady Fleurette right freaking now." But Vita's still being stubborn and won't let go. And that's when Cassia loses it and yells, "How dare you!" at Vita. Finally, Vita releases Lady Fleurette's hair, and peace is restored, for now. Cassia looks straight at Vita and asks her if she really thinks she's the lady of this castle. Cassia's like, "Look, I'm cool with you staying here, but that doesn't mean you can go around sticking your nose in every darn thing." She explains to Vita that what she just did was assault on a guest of the castle, and she's even trying to challenge Cassia's authority. Cassia shoots a quick glance at Zester and tells Vita that she's got this big ego because someone trusts her. Then Cassia drops the bombshell and tells Vita that they're gonna figure out if she can still live in this castle. In the meantime, Vita's gonna be confined to her room. Cassia wants to make it clear to Vita that just because Cassia acted nice doesn't mean they were friends or anything. When Vita starts crying and asks Zester to say something, Cassia shoots him a fierce glare, and he just stays silent like a statue. But Vita keeps on trying to convince Cassia that she did it for her own good. However, Paul jumps in and suggests to Vita that she should just listen to Cassia and go back to her room. Cassia can't even believe that Vita would go nuts just because another woman showed up in the castle. She's like, who cares? It's not unusual for noblemen to have ladies over, duh. And then Zester tries to explain, but Cassia shuts him down real quick. She's all like, Vita, get out of my sight right now and think about what you've done. Zester still tries to say something, but Cassia ain't having it. She just keeps telling Vita to go back to her room. And you know what? Vita looks at Zester all desperate for help, but he gives her this intense stare and tells her to listen to Cassia. Man, that really shocks Vita. After all the craziness settles down, Paul tells Zester that he thinks Cassia got the wrong idea about why they invited Lady Fleurette. He offers to explain it to Cassia, but Zester tells him that he's gonna handle it himself. So, he goes and knocks on Cassia's door, asking if he can talk to her. When he sees Cassia in her dress, his mind's like, dang, she must be freezing. He starts getting all nervous, then Cassia asks him what's the matter. And Zester, all jittery, starts saying it's all his fault and blabbers about Lady Fleurette, how he didn't have any weird intentions when he met her. Cassia's all like, hold up, why are you apologizing for that? It's not even connected to Lady Fleurette. Zester owns up to his screw-up, admitting that he totally messed up by inviting her to the castle and creating a massive misunderstanding. Cassia's like, wait a minute, that's not even the thing you should be saying sorry for. Once Cassia hears Zester's explanation, she's like, look, I ain't even mad about why you invited Lady Fleurette. It's Vita disrespecting me that's got me worked up. Zester tries to explain himself. Cassia shuts him down, saying Paul spilled the beans about Vita's presence in the castle, and she can't deal with any more drama caused by her. Zester starts feeling like a total failure, thinking he let Cassia down once again. But just as he's about to apologize, Cassia cuts him off and says she deserves better treatment after him, 'cause it ain't right for her to be insulted because he can't handle his people. She makes it clear that if she's gonna hear an apology, it better be for that and nothing else. And here's the kicker, Cassia couldn't care less if Zester invites women to the castle or has some kind of thing with Vita. As long as commoners don't act all high and mighty around her, she's cool with it. Zester tries to explain that him and Vita ain't like that. But Cassia's like, whatever, I don't give a damn, giving him the coldest response ever. It leaves poor Zester speechless. Cassia straight up declares she don't care about the truth anymore and gets all serious-faced. In Zester's study, Paul notices that his boss seems down and asks how the chat with Cassia went since she appeared to be in a good mood. He assumes things went well. Paul then tells Zester that Cassia wants him to deal with Vita's punishment and seeks advice on what to do. Zester takes a deep breath and admits that he's the one who hurt his wife, so it's only fair that she makes the decision. He instructs Paul to pass on the message to Cassia and let her do whatever she wants. Paul enters Cassia's room, interrupting her blissful tea-drinking session. She's enjoying some quality relaxation time, and even the sight of Grease looks surprisingly beautiful. He then snaps her out of her daydream by asking if she's got a letter from Haviland, and he hands her the letter. Cassia is caught off guard by this unexpected surprise. With curiosity piqued, she unfolds the letter and starts reading. The letter asks how Cassia is doing in the boonies and if she's happy with her new boo. The writer, Ian, cracks a joke about cursing if he goes on too long and begs for a speedy reply. As Cassia reads the letter, she can't help but grin from ear to ear. It reminds her of the past when she first read one of Ian's letters. She got so mad, feeling like he was disrespecting her and her hubby. She was all fired up and decided to end their friendship right then and there. After that, she made a habit of burning any letters she got from Ian without even looking at them. She wonders why she went to such extremes back then. Cassia asks Paul to help her get ready because she wants to send a reply. She also tells Paul that Viscount Haviland wants to visit and asks if it's cool to invite him. While handing over the stationery, Paul agrees and asks about the arrival date. Cassia says maybe in 2 weeks after Ian gets her letter. She also asks Paul to let Zester know. Cassia then writes the response, questioning why Ian would write such silly stuff, considering someone else could read the letter. She tells him she's doing great and invites him to visit once he gets her letter. Ian's response arrives, saying he's heading to Greece and will probably arrive the day after she receives his letter. This reminds her of her hometown. Back then, she never got the chance to visit, but now she's all about doing what she wants. She throws on a blanket and hopes that God won't ditch her for being lazy. Just when she's about to doze off, there's a knock on the door. It's Paul saying he's with Zester and they want to talk about inspecting the territory. Cassia jumps up in surprise, feeling all nervous, but then she plops back onto the bed and tells them to come in. Now, it's become a common sight to see Cassia lounging in bed. Paul takes his leave, leaving Zester alone with Cassia. Zester hesitates to speak, and Cassia notices. So, she asks him what he wants to discuss, mentioning about the inspection of the territory, and Zester nods along. Cassia is torn about what to do because she was thinking of not getting involved in castle matters. But then she remembers someone from her past life whom she helped, and decides to lend a hand again this time. So she agrees to go with Zester. She asks if they can do the inspection after Viscount Haviland's visit, and Zester agrees. Cassia then tells Zester that if he doesn't have anything else to say, she's about to hit the sack. But just as Zester starts suggesting they take a walk since the weather isn't cold, Cassia cuts him off and says she's too tired, wrapping herself in the blanket. Zester and Cassia are waiting for Viscount Haviland, Ian, to show up at their castle. While they wait, Zester starts feeling a bit uneasy as Cassia lets slip the details about her closeness with Ian. Zester gets curious and asks if they're just friends. But Cassia takes offense and totally shuts down Zester's assumption. Before Zester can say anything else, Ian's fancy carriage rolls in. When Viscount Haviland steps out, Zester can't help but feel small in front of a real nobleman. Anyway, they exchange greetings, and Ian goes straight to Cassia, giving her a big hug and saying how much he missed her. Seeing that, Zester quickly pulls Ian's hand away from Cassia. Cassia explains that Ian is just really excited to see her again after a long time. Ian cheerfully says sorry to Zester. And there's Zester, trying to force a smile on his face. As they chat, Ian expresses his worry about Cassia living in a small town like Greece. But Cassia assures him that she's doing fine and tells him not to look down on Greece. Ian then hands over a gift he brought for Cassia, which catches her by surprise. Ian explains it's the lamp that made from a magic stone, a product of his father's magic engineering industry. Hearing that, Cassia remembers in her past life when magic existed and there were magicians who could use it. Over time, however, magicians disappeared, and the magic stones they left behind became mere rocks. The former Viscount of Haviland saw potential in these stones and gathered scholars for research, leading to the birth of the magic engineering industry, combining magic stone energy with mechanical engineering. Cassia's father was the first to join forces with Haviland, but as the industry gained attention, many sought to acquire Haviland's magic stones. This led to a territorial war, and Cassia's father had no choice but to seek support from Greece. Zester, who effortlessly ended the war, expected a substantial reward from Cassia's father. But all he received was a high-grade magic stone, with the promise that its value would soar once the magic engineering industry took off. Cassia was shocked to learn that her father looked down on Zester. While her father believed in the success of the magic engineering industry, no one could figure out how to unlock the complex magic sealed within the stones, leading to the industry's failure. Suddenly, Paul's voice interrupts Cassia's thoughts, letting her know that the meal is ready. As she sees the high-quality dishes on the table, Cassia is amazed, knowing that each one was prepared with care. The head chef reveals that Paul and Zester asked him to welcome Viscount Haviland wholeheartedly, and he did his best. Zester notices Ian's expression and asks if the food doesn't suit his taste. Ian expresses concern about Cassia's preferences, considering her background as a count's daughter and whether the food in Greece would be suitable for her. Annoyed by this, Cassia assures Ian that the food always caters to her taste and expresses gratitude for the chef's effort in serving high-quality dishes despite the rarity of ingredients. She also points out that it wouldn't be wise to indulge in fancy meals while their people are suffering. Then Cassia gives Ian a stern look, and he apologizes for his behavior. Witnessing Cassia's defense of Grease, Zester is deeply moved. As Zester watches his wife through the window, he remembers what Cassia said in the dining room. It makes him realize that she's not only straightforward but also wise. While thoughts of Cassia occupy his mind, his heart starts racing, leaving him feeling confused. Noticing that Cassia is wearing a thin coat in winter, Zester asks Paul to find a thick wool overcoat and give it to her. Paul is puzzled why Zester doesn't express his true feelings and encourages him to do so. Suddenly, Paul mentions that Zester and Cassia don't seem like an ordinary couple and suggests that Zester sleep in Cassia's room. This suggestion causes Zester to blush, as his thoughts wander, but Paul clarifies that they only need to sleep and not engage in intimacy, as Zester was mistakenly thinking. Meanwhile, Ian and Cassia are strolling around the castle, and Ian apologizes to Cassia for his behavior earlier in the dining room. Cassia explains that, as a baroness, she shouldn't complain about food, and Ian, as a viscount who recently inherited his territory, should also refrain from such behavior. Ian feels like Cassia is treating him like his mother. However, he tells her that he needs her assistance. Showing her a paper with ancient language, Ian explains that those words were written on the magic stone. Handing her the paper, he mentions that the words might explain what kind of magic is contained in the stone, and that everything is expressed through metaphors. Cassia attempts to decipher the ancient language on the high-grade magic stone, but she struggles to grasp the meaning of the metaphors. She trembles as she realizes why the magic engineering industry failed. They didn't even know how to utilize the grand magic sealed within these high-grade stones. She reflects on the fact that they used these seemingly useless rocks as war trophies. Cassia acknowledges that she may not be able to prevent the downfall of the magic engineering industry, but she is determined to ensure that Zester doesn't return with a worthless rock. While Cassia is wondering if they should wait for Viscount Haviland to return to his residence before conducting the territory inspection, she realizes it will only further delay the process, causing concern for her people. Determined to address the issue, she decides to talk to Zester about conducting the inspection the next day. As she opens the door, she's startled to find Zester standing in front of her room, giving her a stern look. Zester quickly apologizes for surprising her and asks where she was headed so late at night. Cassia explains that she was actually on her way to see Zester and invites him inside. Taking a seat, Cassia proceeds to explain her reason for wanting to meet him the territory inspection. Originally, they had planned to postpone it until Ian's departure, but since Ian intends to stay longer, Cassia suggests conducting the inspection the following day. Zester agrees, expressing that she can do as she pleases. Curious about Zester's late-night visit, Cassia jumps to the conclusion that he came for something intimate. Zester is confused by her assumption. However, Cassia suddenly stands up, removes her outer garment, and tells Zester to come closer. Nervously, Zester gets up and asks her to wait. He then tries to explain his true intention, stating that as a married couple, it's normal to sleep in the same bed, but that doesn't mean they have to engage in intimate activities every night. Blushing, he clarifies that he simply wants to lie side by side and have a conversation before going to sleep. As they lie on the bed, Zester appears stiff and blushes. Cassia encourages him to share anything that may be on his mind. However, Zester seems hesitant and nervous to start the conversation. Cassia brings up the topic of Vita's punishment, mentioning that she had left the decision to Zester. Zester responds by saying that since Cassia was the one hurt by Vita, it would be better for her to decide the punishment. Unsatisfied with his answer, Cassia suggests releasing Vita so Zester can reunite with his old friend. This surprises Zester, and he tries to convince her that she misunderstands his relationship with Vita. Cassia turns her back to him, insisting that she won't misunderstand. As Zester tries to express his concern for Cassia to dress warmly for the territory inspection the next day, he receives no response from her, only the sound of her sleeping peacefully. Observing her sleeping face, Zester admires her beauty and contemplates that if he wants to live longer, he shouldn't sleep beside her every night. The day of the territory inspection arrives, and Cassia puts her heart into it. giving her best advice to the residents as she assesses the current situation. Zester watches his wife in amazement as he sees how well Cassia interacts with the residents. Despite being a lord for several years, he had been unaware of the circumstances they faced. Before they head back, Cassia has one last place to visit. They are greeted by a woman named Margaret, who is grateful that Cassia and Zester have come to her humble abode. Cassia notices the swelling on Margaret's hand and asks if she has been working too hard. Wanting to help Margaret, Cassia offers her a ring. Margaret tries to decline the gift, but Cassia insists. Addressing Zester affectionately as honey, Cassia tells him to leave now, knowing that Margaret will chase her to return the ring. However, just as they are about to leave, a man rushes over and calls out to them. Introducing himself as James, he greets them and explains that he happens to be preparing for a new business venture. He politely asks if Cassia could lend a hand. James then shows them a wig he has been working on. Zester becomes angry upon seeing it, but Cassia quickly calms him down. Examining the wig, Cassia tries to recall if it existed in her past life. Meanwhile, Zester becomes angry at the sight of what he believes to be beast fur, while James is terrified as he tries to explain that the wig is made from human hair, not beast fur. Suddenly, Cassia calls Zester honey once again, and when he turns around, he sees Cassia already wearing the red wig, concealing her real hair. James feels relieved that Cassia recognizes the wig. Cassia further explains that as a noblewoman, she often has to dress formally and doesn't have much freedom when it comes to her hair, such as cutting it short or dyeing it with unique colors. Cassia believes that many women feel the same way. Recognizing the potential of the wig to become popular, Cassia asks James if he would like to make a contract with her. In her chamber, Cassia is reminiscing about her past life when wigs became popular after 10 years. Now realizing their value, she thinks it would be fantastic if Grays could thrive and become prosperous by the time her son Rael becomes the Lord. Determined to venture into the wig business, Cassia is interrupted by a knock on her door and Zester's voice. Although annoyed, she opens the door, lets Zester in, and forces a smile. Zester presents her with a coat, explaining that her Ruberno coat is unsuitable for Grease's winters, so he had Paul find her a more suitable one. Cassia shyly expresses her gratitude and steals a glance at Zester, wondering if he has changed since her journey back in time, as they can now have conversations like that. While watching Zester attempt to sleep beside her, Cassia ponders if he is truly peculiar. Just as she is about to fall asleep, Zester calls her name, abruptly sits up, and nervously asks if he can hold her. Observing this, Cassia once again jumps to conclusions and begins to open her sleeping dress, but Zester quickly stops her. With a red face, he explains that he simply wants to hold her while they sleep. Cassia reassures him that as a married couple, he doesn't need her permission for such gestures. Zester turns his head to Cassia, confirming once more if it's alright. Cassia says she prefers it to having a husband who doesn't embrace, look at, or speak to his wife. Zester finds it hard to believe that someone like that exists. After receiving permission, he pulls Cassia closer to him, causing his face to blush. Even Cassia can hear his heart beating loudly and clearly. Before, Cassia used to find Zester's wild, beast-like demeanor sexy. Even his indifferent gaze had an allure to her, and though she disliked how little he spoke, she convinced herself it was charming. Cassia now pities her old self. Suddenly, Cassia asks Zester for a favor, and Zester convinces her to ask for anything. Cassia brings up the topic of their future children, inquiring if Zester will shower them with love and protect them. Hearing this, Zester promises to be a good father for their children. However, not long after, Cassia falls asleep. During her sleep, Cassia talks in her sleep, mentioning Rael and even crying. Zester can't help but feel hurt hearing another man's name from her. Nonetheless, Cassia dreams about her loving family. When she wakes up, she realizes that Zester is not by her side. Meanwhile, in Zester's room, Paul senses the tense atmosphere and suspects that something has happened between Zester and Cassia. Zester instructs Paul to send a document to Viscount Vish and inform him that Zester will be joining his efforts tomorrow. Paul suggests that Zester reconsider Viscount Vish's request for auxiliary troops, as the offered reward is too small compared to the manpower being requested, and the potential dangers involved. However, Zester doesn't agree. Suddenly, Paul asks if there's a reason Zester is in such a hurry. Zester recalls Cassia's sleep-talking from the previous night. Feeling frustrated and helpless, he assumes that Ryle was Cassia's lover before. To distract himself from that thought, Zester believes it's better to go to war. Noticing that something must be troubling him, Paul suggests communicating it to Cassia instead of keeping it to himself, as it could worsen the situation. However, before they can discuss further, the door forcefully opens, and Vita bursts in looking furious. Ignoring Zester's warning about her behavior, Vita screams at Zester in anger, shocking both Paul and Zester. Vita can't believe how Zester treated her, thinking that what she did was not wrong. Remembering the time when Zester was in Boheme, Vita, the daughter of a wealthy landowner, saw herself as no different from a noblewoman, while Zester, the son of a tenant farmer in a small village, was actually Vita's slave. She would force him to do whatever she wanted, and if he refused, he would face punishment. Zester became a mercenary just to escape that miserable life. Still consumed by rage, Vita suddenly demands that Zester choose between her and Cassia. Paul sees her crossing the line and orders her to leave. However, as he opens the door, he is surprised to find Cassia standing there. In a panic, Paul asks why Cassia is there. Cassia puts on a smile and explains to Paul that she wanted to speak to Zester, but seeing that he's busy, she decides to leave and promises to come back later. Zester, aware that Cassia was there, panics and calls out to her, but he's unsure of what to do. Suddenly, Paul's earlier suggestion comes to his mind. He decides to run after Cassia and unexpectedly embraces her from behind. Cassia is taken aback by his action, but asks him to release her since she can't catch her breath while being hugged by Zester. Once she can breathe freely, Cassia urges Zester to speak. Hesitant at first, Zester cheerfully declares that he chooses Cassia. He explains that Cassia is the one he wants, and even if the sky were to split in half, he would still choose her. Vita watches this scene from behind, her eyes filling with tears. She still addresses Zester by his name only and tearfully asks him how he could do that. However, with a stern look, Zester turns to Vita and instructs her to address him as Baron or Lord, not just Zester. This shocks Vita as she has never seen Zester in such a manner. Zester intends to put an end to the servitude disguised as friendship. He firmly tells Vita to return to Boheme immediately. Still unable to believe what Zester said, Vita trembles with anger and warns Zester that he'll regret his decision someday. However, Zester remains unworried and confidently states that he considers it the best decision he's ever made. He then turns to Cassia, smiles at her, and invites her to leave with him, leaving Vita behind. Cassia wonders why Zester is so different from her memories of him in her past life. Zester asks Cassia what she wanted to tell him earlier. Cassia explains that Ian has grown tired of staying inside the castle, so she wanted to ask if she could show him around the territory. Upon hearing this, Zester reveals his jealousy and suggests that Ian should just go home if he's weary, implying that Ian wants to spend more time with Cassia. Cassia is taken aback by Zester's reaction. However, Zester informs her that he will be leaving for battle the next day, explaining the situation in the Viscounty. Cassia suddenly asks how much Zester will be paid. Upon learning that his payment is significantly small compared to the risk, Cassia expresses her displeasure. Cassia knows that Vice is a wealthy territory that takes advantage of others whenever possible. Zester explains that he does it because it's the only way to generate income for their territory and to buy better food for Cassia. Cassia feels puzzled by his explanation. Zester further explains that he realizes Grease doesn't meet Cassia's standards, and she isn't pleased with him either, which is why he's trying to work harder. Zester appears gloomy as he hopes Cassia can forget the memories of her past life. However, he acknowledges that he can't force her to do so and should allow her to reminisce. Confused by Zester's explanation, Cassia asks him what it means. She even states that she never cried because she wanted to return home. Zester tells her that despite that, she still misses it. Cassia denies this, saying she doesn't miss it at all. Suddenly, Zester raises his voice, revealing that Cassia has been yearning for that guy named Rael. Shocked, Cassia trembles and asks Zester where he heard about Rael. Zester tells her that she mentioned his name multiple times while she was sleeping. Gently touching Cassia's face, Zester reassures her that he'll do better so she can forget about Rael. However, Cassia playfully teases him, saying she can't promise him that and mentioning how remarkable it is that such a boy was ever born into this world, referring to how Rael resembles his father. Cassia can't stop chattering about Rael, and it's driving Zester crazy, so he straightforwardly asks her to refrain from it. It turns out Cassia managed to gain some favor by talking in her sleep, which made Zester realize he should treat her better. But Zester claims he was already planning on it before he overheard her sleep talking. Cassia doesn't let him off the hook and playfully teases him, making Zester ask what he can do to earn her trust. He promises to be there for her whenever she's feeling lonely, admitting he's not the smoothest talker but willing to give it his best shot. Cassia notices the determination in Zester's eyes and sees a resemblance between Zester and Rael. Then she reassures Zester that he shouldn't feel inferior, explaining that Rael wasn't her lover, just someone she thought would make a great son with his cuteness and charm. When Zester hears that, he breathes a sigh of relief. All of a sudden, Cassia brings up the battle and asks him to delay his departure by a week. She's worried about being alone at the castle with Viscount Haviland still around. Cassia even plans to ask Viscount Haviland to leave before Zester goes. When Zester hears this, he's overjoyed and thanks Cassia. But then he suddenly admits that he feels unworthy of someone like her, considering himself incompetent compared to her. He declares that he'll give his best until the day he dies, and in his shyness, dashes out the door. Cassia is completely taken aback by what she's witnessing. The other day, Paul feels super nervous because it's the first time Cassia has called him first. She's lying on her bed and tells Paul to take a seat. Cassia lets him know that she asked Zester to postpone his departure for the battle until next week. Paul's face lights up with joy upon hearing this news. She explains that she's concerned about the insufficient compensation for the task. Even the advance payment won't cover the cost of employing mercenaries. Cassia decides to personally send a letter to Viscount Vish and asks Paul to help her prepare. Paul feels relieved and is more than happy to assist. It seems like Cassia won't be able to relax and laze around this time. She's determined to teach Viscount Vish a lesson for looking down on Grease. Even though Vichy is way up north, it's a massive land with super fertile soil. But it's always been a target for invasions, and this winter has been a nightmare thanks to the Rakin tribe. Those guys are causing chaos, terrorizing neighborhoods with monsters from Basque Mountain. They've set up camp at the mountain's base and don't seem to have any plans to leave. Despite their small numbers, those wolf-like monsters are a serious threat. They're 10 feet tall, have 96 teeth, and are way stronger than other monsters. Vich doesn't have its own army, so they're pretty defenseless against this tribe. And guess who they want to take advantage of? Yep, Zester agrees. While reading Cassia's letter, Viscount Vichy looks really unhappy. The letter explains the situation and points out that the money he offered wasn't enough. Maybe he messed up the calculations or something. Cassia asks him to review the contract. Viscount Vish tosses the letter at his butler, clearly showing his anger. The butler tries to give his 2 cents, saying that the amount he offered Zester was too harsh, and that's why Cassia went out of her way to send the letter. But it just adds fuel to Viscount Vich's anger. He's plotting something in his mind and decides to teach Cassia a lesson by talking to her in person. So he writes a response letter to Cassia. The response letter from Viscount Vish arrives, and Paul worries about how to handle it. It seems like an invitation for Cassia to go to Vish. Worried that Viscount Vichy might be trying to intimidate Cassia, she thinks it over and eventually decides to accept the invitation. Paul tells Zester about Viscount Vich's invitation to Cassia, but Zester firmly refuses. He's concerned about the possibility of Cassia encountering the monsters over there. No matter how convincing Paul is, Zester's mind is made up. Meanwhile, Cassia goes to see Ian in his room and finds him busy packing his stuff. Cassia was actually planning to ask Ian to come home soon, But it turns out she doesn't need to because Ian is already getting ready to leave. Confused by the sudden turn of events, Cassia asks what's made Ian rush to return home. Ian explains that a valuable magic stone has gone missing. He kept it safe in the basement of Haviland, sealed with lower-grade magic stones so that only Ian and his sister could access it. The last time his sister checked the stone was right before Cassia left for Greece. The missing magic stone is the one with the ancient language Cassia was trying to decipher. It had something written on it like, "Give a chance to the regretful and remorseful one to repent, and the God of chance will make things right. You must build a new path of repentance." Cassia ponders those words and suddenly asks Ian if it's possible for a magic stone to disappear after being used. Since no one can enter the basement, Cassia wonders if the stone might have been used at a different time. Confused, Ian asks what Cassia means by that. Cassia tries to explain that the stone offers a chance for someone to repent if they regret something. Like if Cassia and Ian severed ties for some reason, and maybe Cassia wants to undo that. Cassia realizes that it's true that she used the power of reverse time. Ian suggests that it could be possible that someone from the future used the magic stone and went back in time, causing it to vanish when time was reversed. Cassia then wonders if that's why she suddenly found herself in the past, questioning who clung to magic engineering research and brought her back when she died. She asks Ian to return to Haviland to investigate what happened. Cassia goes to see Zester, but to her surprise, Zester firmly states that she can accept Viscount Vicha's invitation after he's finished dealing with the subjugation, as Vicha is currently too dangerous. Cassia brings up the topic of hiring mercenaries and asks if Zester has enough money to pay them. Zester assures her not to worry, as he believes the mercenaries have been working for him for years and won't demand exorbitant prices. However, Cassia questions the possibility of the mercenaries asking for higher rates. Offended, Zester turns his back to Cassia, asserting that he wants to handle things as he always has and informs her that he's not as broke as she thinks he is, then leaves the room. Looks like Zester misunderstood once again. Meanwhile, Lady Fleurette is informed that Zester no longer requires lessons from her. Paul apologizes and offers additional compensation. However, Lady Fleurette is fine with it, as she already received her advance payment and didn't do much anyway. She hands Paul a gift for Zester and Cassia, a box of chocolates, suggesting they enjoy it before bed with a glass of wine and romantic candles. At night, knowing this is her last chance to negotiate with Zester regarding the auxiliary troops, Cassia gathers her courage and knocks on Zester's door, seeking permission to enter. Shyly, Zester allows Cassia in and mentions that he was actually on his way to her room. Cassia informs him that she'll be sleeping there tonight. Once inside, Cassia takes a seat on the bed, and they start the conversation. However, Zester continues to decline Cassia's requests, emphasizing the danger she would face there. Cassia brings up the compensation Zester would receive from the war, and Zester insists he's done with that, explaining that he doesn't want to sour things with Viscount Vicha over his payment. Calmly, Cassia shares her thoughts, pointing out the problem with receiving only 1 million silvers for participating in a territorial war, and that it's not something he can excuse under the guise of friendship. But still, Zester insists he'll handle it on his own. Losing her patience, Cassia raises her voice, stating that the contract doesn't even guarantee his safety once he leaves for battle, and bluntly asks what she's supposed to do if Zester loses his life during the fight. Expressing her concern, Cassia tells Zester that if he were to die, she would be left to manage the territory on her own, with a measly 1 million silvers as compensation for his life. She questions how she's supposed to make ends meet with that amount, as it wouldn't even cover a month's worth of castle expenses. Hearing the truth, Zester feels down and wonders if the only thing that matters to Cassia is the price of his life, doubting whether she even cares if he dies. Cassia apologizes for being straightforward, explaining that sugarcoating her words would only prolong his understanding of her point. She emphasizes that she wants Zester to return unharmed, but there are no guarantees. Reminding Zester that he is now a nobleman, she tells him not to see himself as someone else's employee. She also warns him that other nobles will eventually treat Cassia the same way they treat him, and if that happens, she will be greatly disappointed in him. Cassia declares that she is the wife of Baron Grease, not the wife of a mercenary who risks his life for pocket change. Looking helpless, Zester eventually agrees to Cassia's request to visit Viscount Vicha. Cassia notices the gloomy expression on Zester's face and becomes concerned about his feelings. She explains her true intention, assuring Zester that he doesn't have to fear other nobles. She believes it's more honorable to earn a noble title through achievements rather than inheriting one. Cassia encourages Zester to have confidence in himself. Hearing everything Cassia says, Zester can't help but blush uncontrollably. Suddenly, Cassia notices a gift box on the table and asks what it is. Zester tells her it's a gift for her. As she opens the box, she becomes delighted. Trying the chocolate, Cassia is amazed by its taste, declaring it the best chocolate she's ever had. She then offers some to Zester, who shyly accepts it. But out of the blue, they both feel a ticklish sensation after eating the chocolate. Confused about what's happening, they decide to go to sleep. However, Cassia experiences unusual sensations. Her breath becomes heavier, her face feels hot, and her heart beats faster. When she gets up from the bed, she's surprised to see that Baron seems to be experiencing the same symptoms. Cassia asks Zester if he's alright, but she's confused by the strange voice she's making. Not understanding what's happening to their bodies, Cassia abruptly tells him that she needs to use the restroom, but Zester can't hold it anymore and says he needs to go first. As he gets up from the bed, Cassia catches a glimpse of something that shocks her. She asks Zester what it is, while he confusedly asks what she's referring to. Pointing to a certain part of Zester's body, he hastily gets back into bed and covers himself with a blanket, telling her he has no idea what she's talking about. Cassia wonders what's happening to them and suddenly remembers the chocolate box on the table. She asks Zester who gave them the chocolates. However, the more Zester looks at Cassia, the more he finds her dazzling today. Zester's battling with himself, wanting to touch Cassia but giving himself a face slap instead. Cassia's concerned expression doesn't escape him. Despite avoiding her eyes, he urges her to split up for the night, blaming some weird state he's in. Cassia mirrors his sentiments, feeling like her legs are glued and things are off. She queries about the source of this chocolate spell. Zester remembers Paul, his butler, mentioning Lady Fleurette dropped by with a present to amp up their bond. He bows, sorry and all, revealing Lady Fleurette's pre-Choco Castle visit. Out of the blue, Zester turns to Cassia and tosses the question of how they should handle this, and if he can help in any way. Cassia's fingers graze Zester's cheek as she lets out a sigh of relief about their marriage. Gathering his guts, Zester questions whether he's allowed to plant one on Cassia. But before he can fully blurt it, Cassia leans in and locks lips with him. When they finally break the kiss, Zester's quivering but manages to stroke Cassia's hair, his voice shaky as he's about to seek permission. Cassia can't contain it any longer, giving Zester the green light to ask for anything he's got in mind. Zester's gentle touch leads to an affectionate kiss with Cassia, and he suddenly pins her onto the bed. He then puts into action the tricks he picked up from Lady Fleurette. Cassia even remarks on the newfound pleasure, catching Zester's desire on fire. They keep at it until they're fully satisfied. Looks like Lady Fleurette can give him a high five now. The next morning, Zester wakes up to find Cassia still nestled beside him. He can hardly believe he could bring such pleasure to Cassia. Tucking her bare shoulder under the blanket, he places a soft kiss on it, whispering that he's really into Cassia. Cassia wakes up to find Zester's arm draped around her. She asks if he's up yet, noting that today is the day Viscount Haviland, Ian, takes off. Instead of answering her, Zester pleads for Cassia to call him honey like last night. Blushing a bit, Cassia insists on getting up first. She slips into her clothes and heads toward the door, but when she spots the leftover chocolate box on the table nearby, she shoots a look back at Zester. In a flash, Zester snatches the box, muttering about those chocolates being trouble, his cheeks reddening. Amused, Cassia can't hold back her laughter. She turns away, suggesting that he doesn't need to toss them out since they clearly helped him conquer his weaknesses. Zester's quick to retort that he's totally capable even without those chocolates. As she reminds him about Ian's departure, Cassia shyly addresses him as honey. The moment that word escapes her lips, Zester is taken aback, utterly stunned. And there they stand, all set to send Ian packing back to his own turf. Just as Ian's about to plant a kiss on Cassia's hand, Zester swoops in and snatches her hand away. With a protective edge, Zester reminds Ian that he mentioned being in a hurry. Ian, all smiles, wishes Cassia good health before making his way to the carriage. Zester and Cassia remain holding hands, feeling a mix of awkwardness and nervousness. Fast forward to the day Zester and Cassia visit Viscount Vish. Their carriage pulls up and Zester steps out first to be greeted by Viscount Vish. But then Cassia steps out, her face lit up with a grin as she exchanges greetings with Viscount Vish. His jaw practically hits the floor at the sight of Zester's stunning wife. After regaining his composure, Viscount Vish musters that Cassia's even more breathtaking in person. Zester gives Viscount Vish a stern look but doesn't comment. As they prepare to enter the place, a sense of unease washes over Zester. Cassia notices and asks if something's up. He places his hand on her shoulder and shyly motions for her to call him honey. The grub's already laid out on the table, and seeing the look on Zester's face, Cassia's wondering if Zester's never been dealt with like this by Viscount Vish, even though they've known each other for years. So, that's when the main chat kicks off. Vish brings up the letter Cassia sent about sorting out Zester's payment for what he asked for. With this smug grin, he flat out asks Zester if he's been ticked off all along, cause the payment should match what he got before. But before Zester can reply, Cassia steps in, takes control of the situation, and explains that Zester's never griped about it. He just didn't realize there was a problem that needed sorting. She goes on to say it's pretty hard to swallow that Vish expects Zester to put his life on the line in battle for such a measly sum. Backed into a corner, Vish admits he messed up and then asks Zester what he thinks about reworking the payment deal. Before they even roll up to Vish's castle, Cassia lays out the game plan for Zester on how to handle the compensation chat. So when the moment arrives, Zester sticks to Cassia's script. Instead of just dishing out an answer, he tosses the ball back in Vish's court by asking for his 2 cents first. Putting on his best poker face to hide his irritation, Vish throws in the offer of an extra 1,000,000 silvers as an advance. Cassia can practically read Zester's mind, knowing he's probably thinking it's a pretty good deal. But before this whole meetup goes to waste, Cassia gives Zester's thigh a discreet pinch, a signal for him to zip it as she's taking the reins from here on out. No hesitation on Cassia's part, she throws out a cool 50,000 gold as an upfront payment and another 50,000 as the victory bonus. Vish starts to get ready to reply, probably thinking he's gonna school Cassia on this stuff. But guess what? Cassia's got it all covered. She's had her share of success lessons. After leaving Vish with his jaw hanging, Cassia seals the deal perfectly by mentioning that their proposal isn't life or death for them, and she's even open to hearing his thought. She adds a touch of sass, saying this whole gig could be like a pleasant vacation if he decides to pass. Back in their room, Zester spills his concern about what if Viscount Vish gives Cassia's proposal the thumbs down, especially since he's already got some mercenaries on the payroll. But Cassia tosses a reassuring line his way, firmly believing that Viscount Vish isn't that thick-headed. All this time, Grease hasn't crumbled thanks to Zester's secret weapon, Paul, cause Zester's about as clueless as they come when it comes to cash. And now, Cassie is even dishing out some solid advice to help Zester get his army building game on point. Then, out of nowhere, Zester pops the question about why, on her second day in Grease, she swore off doing the domestic grind, claiming she was about as skilled at it as a cat trying to juggle. But her whole vibes shifted. Zester goes on to shower her with props for her domestic wizardry. While Cassia spills the beans, it's not like she's got a buffet of choices. Zester's domestic skills are basically on par with a one-legged cat trying to dance. Hearing this, all Zester can do is bust a gut laughing. Probably relieved that he's Cassia's own Mr. Inadequate. Geez, this guy is something else, huh? Holed up in his room, Viscount Vish lets off steam by giving a piece of his mind to whatever's within earshot. Even if his butler agrees that what Cassia threw on the table was pretty reasonable, Viscount Vish is all worked up because now he can't milk Zester like he used to. Just when he's in the heat of it, the guards burst in with a hot scoop. The Rakan tribes are crashing their territory. Zester's gearing up to hit the road, a twinge of worry gnawing at him for Cassia. But guess what? Cassia's still got the guts to slap the deal on Viscount Vich's table. Yet he takes this chaos as an escape route to dodge it. Cassia's not impressed, watching Viscount Vich's condescending attitude toward her man. Zester's out there schooling the Rakan tribes without breaking a sweat, and this makes Jerome, the Rakan tribe's second in command, question if Zester's even human. But hold up, Gerd, another big shot from the Rakan tribe cuts in, giving him a task. He's gotta haul it to the castle and snatch that lord as a hostage, cause that's their one shot at staying in the game. So, here's the deal. Everyone's buying into this tale that the Rakan tribe's been on a rampage, tearing through the residential spots of the Vis County. But honestly, that's like a major exaggeration. Sure, the tribe set up shop close to the Viscounty, but they've never actually gone on a raiding spree or started slinging daggers in people's houses. All that gossip spreading across the north? Totally not true. They're just looking for some chill vibes, you know? A nod of approval to settle down. They've even been sending all these polite letters to Veach Castle, trying to get the green light. But guess what Viscount Vich has been up to? Plotting to erase them from the map, while also cooking up some seriously rotten rumors about them. He's been on a smear campaign, basically. And get this, even though nobody's exactly jumping to help out Vish, the Viscount's still grinning ear to ear because he thinks he can use Zester for all he's got. And finally, the Rakan tribes roll right into the castle, and what do they find? This trembling mess on the floor. Jerome's had enough. The guy's boiling mad. He grabs Vis by the collar, giving him a shake, and tells him to cut the crap. He's got to order his troops to stand down and stop turning them into mincemeat. Jerome's not cooling off, though. Still on a rampage. He barks at Vis to fetch him the head honcho of those subjugation forces. But wait. Vis, not giving up that easily. He's fuming, but he's also crafty. He knows Zester's not about to kick the bucket for him, so he cooks up a different plan to save his own skin. You got it, he tells the Rakan tribes to snatch Cassia up and use her as leverage. Thinking he's got a solid escape plan, Vis signals his butler into action. He's dialing for some backup troops, ready to drop some serious coin, cause he knows those 10 gold bars aren't gonna cut it, not by a long shot. While all this is going down on the battlefield, things are heating up. The fight's dragging on cause these monsters are just ridiculous strong. Zester's got a feeling that something's off, like a warning bell ringing in his head. He's thinking he needs to haul it back to the castle. But just as he's fretting about Cassia, bam! A monster launches itself at him, ready for a showdown. Using his top-notch reflexes, Zester's blocking that monster's attack like a boss. Over on the flip side, Cassia's been taken to Basque Mountain. Jerome's acting like a gentleman, even hands her a coat to ward off the chill. Cassia's musing to herself, turns out Jerome's not just some brute. He's got a touch of thoughtfulness in him. As Jerome gets dinner going, Cassia takes the plunge and gets a convo started. She casually throws out there that the Rakan tribe isn't exactly how she heard it. A bit of small talk to break the ice. Jerome doesn't hold back either. He starts spilling the beans about his tribe's backstory. Chief Gerd? That's his brother. And here's a shocker. Their mom was an empire noblewoman captured by their dad, and she birthed them into this world. Back in the day, they were just kids. Didn't realize the big bad their dad was up to. Didn't know the shame their mom was swallowing. After she passed, they decided they weren't gonna be beasts. They wanted to be humans, live like them too. He lays it all out. Their little squad wasn't storming the castle to kick up a fight. They were just after a hand, a little help to set up shop and live like regular folks. He makes it clear they've never gone around attacking the locals, and they've even schooled the Rackens not to harm humans. These guys even got their own grub supply sorted and never pulled a village invasion. This news drops like a bomb on Cassia. All that chatter she's been hearing? Just wild tales spun by Viscount Vish to con a load of freebies from neighboring turf. The more she digs into Viscount Vish's story, the nastier it gets. That guy's got wickedness on tap, and it's seriously getting under her skin. And then comes another twist. Jerome spells it out. They gotta take down the head honcho of those subjugation forces, but he swears on his name that he'll make sure Cassia's back in one piece. This new bombshell just keeps rattling Cassia's world even more. But Cassia knows that even after they've chopped off Zester's head, this whole thing won't just wrap up. So she lays it out that she figures Viscount Vish has probably whipped up a fresh gang or asked for backup from some other turf, cause all he's gunning for is to kick the Rockin' tribes out. So she throws out the idea of putting a lid on this mess without throwing any more folks into the fire. Zooming back to the battleground, Zester's just got wind that Cassia's now the Rockin' tribe's guest up in the Basque Mountain. It hits him hard that he couldn't stick to his word and shield Cassia. So he bites the bullet and goes along with the Rockin' tribe chief's orders. Meanwhile, what Cassia's pitching is they can shack up in Gree's territory instead. It's the silver bullet to their sticky situation. The Rockin' tribe gets digs to crash, and in return, Grease scores some heavy-duty weaponry from the Rockin' bunch. Cassia also breaks down that they'll let the Rockin' tribe live like regular folks, and Grease's terrain's got mountains aplenty, just like the Rockin' hideout. Jerome ain't buying it, cause now his gang's clashing swords with Zester and crew. But Cassia's got remorse dripping off her, cause there's been a mix-up, and she's all about ironing it out. She levels a firm look at him and lays down the law. They either go down together or rise up together. But just as Jerome's about to pipe up, someone hollers for him from behind. It's Gerd who finally rolls up to their camp, dragging Zester and some of his buddies along, looking all helpless. The moment Zester spots Cassia, he can't hold back the waterworks, full-on regretting dragging Cassia into this mess. When they see Zester blubbering like a little kid, even his knights can't help but stifle their laughs. Even the Rockin' tribes are feeling a twinge of sympathy for the guy. But Gerd, the chief, still figures lopping off Zester's head is the ticket to fix their tribe's woes. Zester's all set to do a dramatic hero move-in, throw himself on the sacrificial altar for Cassia. He's even saying Cassia would have been living the high life if she hadn't gotten mixed up with him. Cassia's trying to shut down Zester's noble sacrifice act, but the whole thing's giving Zester's knights a case of the giggles cause they think he's the one who could die of laughter. Cassia breaks down the whole current mess, spilling the beans about the Rockin' tribe rumors and the real problem, Viscount Vish, who's about to rain on their parade. And of course this bombshell has Gerd boiling over. So then Cassia reveals about the plan she hashed out with Jerome earlier, the one where they all shack up in Gree's territory. Lucky for them, their chief isn't stuck in their ways. So no drama, the deal gets inked without a hitch, cause it's pretty much the best fix they've got. Now, they're all marching their way back to Grease, and big props to Cassia for making it all go down. You know how it is, Zester's feeling a bit down in the dumps cause he thinks Cassia's too darn good for him. But at the same time, he's not looking to lose her. So, he puts on his apologetic hat for acting like a total goof earlier, and he's all about promising to tune into Cassia's frequency from here on out. He's got those almost teary eyes going, and he's straight up begging Cassia not to give him the boot. Cassia swoops in with some reassurance, throwing out a solid promise. Meanwhile, words about Zester's troops has hit the radar of Count Axios and Viscount Varnon. So they're eyeballing the troops, and wouldn't you know it? There's Zester rolling with a lady by his side. They do the meet and greet, and Viscount Varnon's curiosity's off the charts. He's itching to know what went down and who these new players are, especially the lady. Zester then introduces his better half, and this totally catches Count Axios off guard. Cassia steps up, throws out a greeting, and sends a straight-up laser glare in Count Axios' direction. So, this total hottie, the lord from up north, let's just call him Axios. Well, better not simp for him, even though we're totally tempted to. But let's admit it, hot dudes can weaken our resolve in a snap. Yep, he's got this major not impressed look plastered on his face, and he's all like, what's Cassia doing here? It's like hitting the jackpot. Cassia's grinning on the inside because that's the exact reaction she was gunning for from him. So, she spills about the whole crazy situation that went down and how they've decided to give the Raken tribe a crash pad in Greece. She goes on to break down that the Raken tribes never laid a finger on the Empire's folks. All they did was ask Viscount Vis for a little piece of land to call home. You can bet your bottom dollar that our super attractive yet potentially villainous dude realizes what a snake Vis really is after this bombshell revelation. And then she goes full-on critic mode on those northern big shots, giving them a good old piece of her mind. She's like, you guys act like this ain't your concern, but newsflash, it's not a one-territory issue. But real talk, those northern lords were giving Vis the cold shoulder not because they were being indifferent, but because they thought his demands were downright laughable. See, the thing is, those northern territories are practically holding hands on the map and have had their fair share of unwelcome visitors trampling through in the past. So, there's this unspoken rule to always lend a hand to your neighbor in need. And as you can guess, Varnon isn't exactly thrilled about being called out like this. He drops the rude card on Cassia just to stir the pot. But Cassia's not done dishing it out. She lays down the truth that even though Zester knew Vis's deal was shady, he still counted it as the North's problem. Those northern lords are left squirming and stammering, pretty much getting a face full of embarrassment. It's like a straight-up slap to their pride. Now, Axios takes a deep breath, admitting Cassia's hitting the nail on the head, and he's got this whole I'm getting told off by a young baroness vibe going on. He swears to keep her words in his mental file cabinet. Then, he pivots and tosses a question at Zester, wondering if he charged into battle with Cassia right by his side. Before Zester can even get a word in, Cassia swoops in, fast as lightning. She plays the miscommunication card, explaining the situation without blowing the lid off the truth about the conniving Vis selling her out to the Raken tribe. But Axios isn't missing a beat. He's got his truth radar on, and he's reading between those lines. Plus, Jerome can't help but chime in, since Cassia's busy trying to put up defenses for both Vis and the Raken tribe. So, Jerome lets it rip, lays down the whole deal for the Northern Lords. And what do you know? Cassia's master plan slides into place without a hitch. When you're dealing with nobles, their sense of honor and pride won't just fade away no matter what. Cassia's got this down pat, which is exactly why she pulled the strings to have Jerome spill the beans about the real deal to them. The embarrassment these big shots are feeling now is going to turn into arrows aimed right at Viscount Vish. As they're trekking back to Greece, Zester pipes up and asks Cassia how she's acquainted with Count Axios and Viscount Varnon, considering it's their first run-in. Cassia tries to dodge Zester's gaze, brushing it off like she just guessed. But here's the kicker. Verl Axios, that smokin' hot dude with the dark hair and red eyes, was a total jerk in her previous life. He was off his rocker when he went and seduced Cassia right under Zester's nose. Inside Vis's castle, the sudden arrival of Axios and Varnan is like a bombshell, hitting Vis right in the gut. Varnan's first move is to unleash his fury on Vis, and it's pretty much raining thunder and lightning. And naturally, Axios is the heavyweight here, the one who's got Vis trembling in his boot. So, Axios isn't holding back. He's throwing out his demand for the dirt on what Vis pulled with the Rakan tribe. Plus, he's got beef about how Vis traded away Zester for what's basically pocket change and even used Cassia as a hostage. Axios is straight up asking Vis if he realizes the gig they've got as lords in the Simone Empire. These Simone Imperial folks are the big shots of the continent, and they expect their lords to be all about that generosity. If strangers show up and aren't causing trouble for the Empire, you can't just boot them out, you've got to treat them kindly. But this crafty Vis seems to be totally clueless about it, and that's making them look pretty awful. And then there's the whole deal with Cassia. She managed to escape from being a hostage and even scored herself a new army. Talk about a major facepalm moment for Vis. It gets so bad that Varnan decides to cut ties with Vis. As Axios watches this whole mess unfold, he can't shake off this nagging regret for passing on the Emperor's marriage proposal to wed Cassia. Now that he sees Cassia as this gutsy, sharp noblewoman, he's kinda thinking he might have missed out on something special, and he's got this newfound urge to be with her. In Cassia's room, she's jotting down a letter to her dad, Count Ruberno, spilling the beans on what's up in Greece. She's asking him to throw some cash her way because she's got this plan with James to keep their wig business going, but her wallet's looking pretty empty. She stops scribbling when Zester walks in. Zester snags the letter off the table, gives it a read, and you can tell he's got mixed emotions about it. Cassia's kinda shocked to see Zester reading her letter. But hey, the cat's out of the bag now. She figures Zester might be feeling down about dragging her into a place that's running low on cash. Maybe even thinking he forced her to write that letter to her dad. Zester starts saying sorry, mentioning that he didn't want Cassia to feel like she had to swallow her pride. But Cassia's got this determined look on her face. She tells him it's not because of him that she's hitting up her dad for money. Greece is her turf too, and she's all about making it a better place to live. So, she's not gonna act all silly and waste time just to save face. Then, she grabs Zester's hand and tells him to get closer. So, they're chilling on Cassia's bed, and she drops this question on Zester. She's like, hey, if our kid ever asks you for help someday, do you think she'd seem desperate or lame? Zester's totally caught off guard, but he's like, nah, not at all. Cassia then figures her dad would feel the same way. But out of nowhere, there's this super weird vibe in the air, like Zester's gonna lay one on Cassia. And yep, he goes for it. No hesitation. He plants one on Cassia, and it's all fiery and passionate. Even though he's always felt like he's just some regular guy lusting after a goddess, he went for it anyway. After their lips part, Zester's all blushing and nervous, and he's like, can we, do more than that? You can probably guess what went down after that with that big grin on Zester's face. He's all about treating her like a queen now. Even if he's munching on plain old barley bread, he's gonna whip up gourmet meals for her. And even if he's freezing his tail off, she's getting the fanciest, warmest clothes. But then, Zester brings up that letter from earlier, saying maybe she shouldn't send it to her dad. Cassia's like, no biggie, and shyly admits that she'd feel pretty lonely if he left the castle to make money. That's when Zester just can't help but pull her close and hug her tight. He promises her he won't leave her alone and reveals that he hates being away from her, but sometimes he's gotta go hustle for some cash. Then Cassia drops the bomb about her business plan to make Greece the richest place up north. But she throws a curveball and asks if she can visit Ruberno. Zester shoots that down real quick with a solid no, and Cassia's left scratching her head. So it seems Zester got a bit worried that Cassia might ditch him by mentioning she wanted to visit Ruberno. Cassia's quick to clear things up though, telling him she just wants to make one quick visit. Zester breathes a sigh of relief and then suggests they go together, even though he still looks kinda anxious that she might bolt. Fast forward a week. Cassia's got herself a bunch of letters and gifts from Vis, including some gold bars from Varnan, and get this, Axios sent her a whopping 30 gold bars. Paul even mentions that these goodies should help cover the castle's expenses for a while and pay for the training of their new soldiers. In Axios' letter, he's all compliments about Cassia's smarts, and even invites her and Zester to come visit his turf. Cassia starts thinking back to when she first met Axios in her past life. It was during this big territory war up north, a challenge to the king of the north, Axios himself. Vis and Varnan teamed up, and Zester joined Axios' side. Axios ended up in pretty rough shape and was brought to their castle looking all beat up. Zester begged Cassia to help Axios, so she nursed him back to health, losing sleep and everything because she was scared she'd be blamed if something went wrong. Axios was on the brink of death during that whole territory war and only snapped out of it when he heard their allies won. Zester had a lot of trust and respect for Axios as a comrade, even though Axios definitely wasn't acting like one. Axios even tried to make a move on Cassia behind Zester's back. Cassia's still ticked just thinking about it. But as she ponders it, she realizes that the same territory war is about to kick off again in a few months. She wonders if there's anything she can do to make sure Grease doesn't get caught in the middle of it this time. Out of nowhere, there's a knock on the door, interrupting Cassia's train of thought. It's a servant with some news. James has already rolled into the castle. Cassia springs to her feet, excited to check out how her business is doing. In the dining room. While they munch on their meal, James spills about how he tweaked the wigs based on Cassia's advice, which she totally snagged from her past life, back when they had the dopest wigs around. As they chow down, James lets slip that he specifically swung by Grease because of Zester. He starts raving about how Zester's this legendary mercenary who held off 150,000 soldiers with just 50,000 troops. Cassia's jaw drops at this revelation. But Zester's all like, "Nah, it was no big deal," and starts talking up Axios instead. Cassia's not having it and asks James for more deets on that war story. James spills that the battle went down at Algor Gorge up north, and Zester managed to outsmart the Burt troops because the area was so darn narrow. They basically used the terrain to their advantage. But when Zester's about to start the Axios praise train again, Cassia's clearly annoyed. She's trying to keep a smile on her face while holding back and tells Zester that she just doesn't get why he won't quit praising Axios, especially when, let's be real, Axios' orders were pretty much a suicide mission. James even agrees with her. Cassia encourages Zester to give himself more credit, because he had plenty of wins during that war. Later that night, in Cassia's room, she gets a letter back from her dad, basically saying he misses her loads and wants her to come visit Ruberno pronto. Cassia decides she'll hit up Ruberno first and then meet up with Axios for that territory war thing. But then, out of nowhere, she starts feeling uneasy because she hasn't started her period yet. It's kind of funny. She and Zester seem to be glued together whenever there's a chance. She starts worrying about Rael and Lucy, the kids she and Zester had in her past life. But just when she's deep in thought, Zester knocks on the door and, yup, it's bedtime. But here comes the twist. Zester starts making his move and gets all jittery when he's got Cassia pinned on the bed. He's leaning in like he's about to lay one on Cassia, and then she suddenly pushes his lips away, saying she's not up for that tonight. You can totally picture how Zester's feeling right now, right? Zester's feeling super down on himself and can't stop saying sorry to Cassia. He turns away, feeling all embarrassed, and even calls himself trash and a beast. He knows Cassia must be exhausted from covering for his foolishness. Cassia can hardly believe her ears. So, she's like, "You know what? It's okay if you want to crash in your own room tonight." That really gets Zester's attention. He quickly turns toward Cassia, eyes all teary, because she basically just told him to beat it. His face turns bright red as he tells her he likes waking up together every morning. Seeing how flustered he is, Cassia reaches out and touches Zester's face, trying to reassure him. She uses her gentle voice to tell him that she's not taking over his duties. She's just finishing what she started. She also knows he's been busting his butt training the new soldiers. Zester's blush goes up a notch when he realizes Cassia knows he's been spending all his time at the drill hall. He pulls Cassia in closer, saying it won't be easy just watching her tonight, but he's happier when she's right there with him. Fast forward 10 days. They're in a carriage, and Zester looks all stiff and nervous. Cassia can't help but laugh at how on edge he is. Zester asks when they'll arrive, and Cassia, with a big grin on her face, tells him they're already there, in her hometown, Ruberno. So, they roll up in Ruberno, and all the folks from the castle come out to give them a warm welcome. This just cranks up Zester's nervousness even more. He gets off the carriage with all the gifts he brought for Cassia's family and starts greeting them, all jittery and stuff. He throws out apologies for not coming sooner, but Cassia's dad just shoots him this icy glare. But when Cassia steps off the carriage and sees the situation, her dad's attitude does a 180. He immediately flashes a big smile, calls out to her, rushes over, and gives her a big hug. Her brother and sister get in on the action too because they've missed her like crazy. Even her mom is all worried, saying she looks thinner. Then, her dad grabs Cassia's hand and invites her to hurry inside for lunch. Cassia puts on the brakes though, and introduces Zester, asking if her dad has said it yet. Cassia's dad just stares at Zester for a bit, not saying a word. Eventually though, he shakes Zester's hand, but the vibe is kinda strange. They all gather in the living room and start opening the gifts Zester brought. He's got some bling for Cassia's sister and mom and a snazzy coat for her little bro. And as they're all sitting there, Cassia's dad is just sizing up Zester from his spot, thinking the only thing worth noting is the dude's fit physique from running around on the battlefield. Cassia's sister spots a box on Cassia's lap and can't help but ask what's inside. Cassia's got this big grin on her face as she's all set to open the box, revealing a bunch of wigs inside. Her family's jaws drop seeing all that hair in there. Cassia quickly fills them in on what these wigs are made of and how to use them. Her sister can't resist trying one on, and she's totally amazed when she looks at herself in the mirror. Cassia's dad chimes in, saying it sounds like a promising business opportunity. He even suggests financing her business and having her work in Ruberno, since there are plenty of wealthy residents who'd buy her wigs, even if they aren't nobility. Cassia brushes off the idea though, and says she appreciates the offer but wants to start in Greece. Seeing Cassia's determination, her dad gets it. Then he offers her a cool 1 million gold coins for support funding. Cassia calmly agrees, laying out her plan to get support from neighboring territories if needed. She mentions offering distribution rights and shares, but the shares won't go above 5%, and they'll be based on the support fund amounts. Her dad's kinda shocked, wondering who'd invest for such a small share, but Cassia's pretty confident in her business. In the end, they agree that her dad will provide all the funds for her first batch, and in return, he gets distribution rights for the South. Cassia seals the deal with a big, happy smile. Meanwhile, Cassia and Zester are heading back to their room, leaving the rest of the family in the living room. Cassia's mom mentions how Cassia hasn't changed at all and has become even more amazing. Suddenly, Cassia's dad feels a hint of regret, wishing he hadn't sent her away and could have had her live with them. He recalls the moment when the Emperor pushed him to send Cassia to the north. Even though he tried to refuse it many times, he had no choice but to send her to Greece, a place that shouldn't even be considered a proper territory. Out of nowhere, Cassia's mom mentions that Zester turned out to be a lot better than she initially thought. Before they met, she really couldn't stand him, but seeing the way Zester looks at Cassia made her realize he truly adores her. But her dad adds that, of course, Zester should adore Cassia, considering he married a woman he didn't deserve. Cassia's little brother, Alan, jumps in saying he doesn't approve of Zester either, and that Zester doesn't suit Cassia at all. Cassia's dad agrees with Alan but warns him to be careful with his words. So Alan pulls his sister aside, saying he wants to talk to her. When they're alone, Alan starts going on about Zester, reminding Estella about how they were all pretty ticked off before Zester came into the picture. He's like, seriously, what makes Zester the right fit for Cassia? Estella tries to defend Zester, saying that he seems like a decent guy now that they've met him. But Alan isn't buying it. He brings up Cassia's business and figures that if she manages to turn Grease, that crummy and poor territory, around, Zester's gonna get treated like a hero. He even predicts that Zester will start taking credit for Cassia's successes, even though he hasn't achieved squat himself. Estella starts getting worried about her sister too. So Alan cooks up a plan saying they need to make it crystal clear to Zester that they're on different levels. Now, they're all gathered in the dining room, and there's this fancy spread of food laid out on the table. Zester's looking at it all and wondering if folks in the South always eat this much. Alan, all set to put his plan into action, starts comparing the food culture in the North and the South. He points out that Zester might be feeling a bit out of his element since he's never had dishes made with such pricey ingredients. Alan even goes ahead and calls in the chef to give Zester the lowdown on each dish, and Zester's head is spinning from all the info. He's starting to get real nervous. Zester spots the turkey nearby and figures he'll go for something familiar. But the chef steps in and lets him know they're gonna cut and serve the turkey into bite-sized pieces right on his plate. That's when Estella and Alan decide to have some fun at Zester's expense. They start making fun of him, and Cassia, who's right there watching the whole thing, is getting pretty annoyed. She can't believe her brother and sister have gotten this cheeky. Then, Cassia gets up from her chair and says she wants to look after Zester for his first meal down south. While she's slicing the turkey, Cassia tells Zester there's no need for any special way to eat, and she encourages him to dig in comfortably. Zester's all grateful and flashes a big smile, thanking Cassia. But Cassia doesn't stop there. She goes the extra mile and lovingly feeds Zester right in front of her family, and this totally sets Alan off because that's not at all what he had in mind. Out of nowhere, Count Ruberno, Cassia's dad, drops a bombshell on her, saying that Ian's gonna swing by tonight and crash at the castle for a few days. Cassia's completely caught off guard by this news. Her dad goes on to explain that Ian's bringing along the heir of a philosopher family to the Haviland Viscounty for some magic stone research, so he figured he'd extend an invitation since he had to meet with them anyway. Cassia, not holding back, starts arguing with her dad, unable to believe that he picked the exact time when she and Zester were visiting Ruberno, even though he could have seen them later. Not wanting to get into it with Cassia, her dad turns to Zester instead, who seems totally cool with the idea. After lunch, Cassia tells Zester to hang out in their room for a bit, because she needs to chat with her dad. While he's waiting, Alan and Estella invite him to have a tea for a little chit-chat. They kick off the conversation by asking about Zester's hometown, and they can hardly believe it when they find out just how poor Zester's background was. Estella chimes in, saying that if he'd grown up in a tiny village as a farmer, he probably wouldn't have even come close to her sister. Alan nods in agreement and adds that if Zester hadn't made a name for himself in the Empire War, he would have never had a chance to meet someone like Cassia. Zester's there with this big, beaming smile, totally on the same page with them. He says that's why he wakes up every day feeling grateful. But then, he gets a bit serious and looks down, saying that he's grateful, but he's also got a lot of regret. Estella just keeps on singing Cassia's praises, talking about how awesome her sister is. But Alan decides to get straight to the point, making it crystal clear that Zester might be married to Cassia, but shouldn't assume he truly has her. He goes even further, saying he thinks Zester probably knows deep down that Cassia isn't really the right match for him. Alan's convinced that even if Cassia were to divorce, she'd have no trouble finding a decent suitor. Estella chimes in and mentions that even Ian was super worried about Cassia. Ian apparently said that if Cassia were to return to Ruberno someday, he'd be more than willing to stand by her side. But then, they both suddenly stop talking when they see Zester. He's not saying a word, but he's trembling like he's holding something in so hard. Finally, he opens up and agrees with everything they've said, admitting his own shortcomings. But he makes a promise right then and there. He's gonna dedicate himself to protecting Cassia and treating her like gold. Even though he feels awful and maybe sounds a bit selfish, all he wants is for him and his wife to spend the rest of their lives together in Greece. Alan and Estella are totally terrified at how intense Zester looks, and they're practically shaking. But then, with a determined look on his face, Zester declares that he'll do his absolute best to make Cassia happy. Meanwhile, Cassia finishes her chat with her dad and is heading over to see Zester, knowing that Alan and Estella are currently having a tea session with him. She starts getting a bit anxious, wondering if her siblings are hatching some sort of scheme against Zester. But as she approaches the room, she eavesdrops on their conversation, signaling to the maids to stay quiet so she can listen in. And when Zester mentions that he's gonna give it his all to make Cassia happy, Cassia's cheeks flush crimson. To prevent her siblings from ganging up on Zester even further, Cassia strides into the room, completely catching Alan and Estella off guard. They're downright terrified when Cassia demands to know what they think they're up to. Cassia can be scarier than their parents when she wants to be, especially since she used to be the one responsible for keeping her siblings in check. Alan then offers a sincere apology to Cassia, admitting that he might have disrespected Zester because he was worried about her. Seeing Alan teary-eyed, Zester tries to console him, but he's puzzled by Cassia's behavior. Cassia, with a determined glare, acknowledges that she understands her siblings' intentions, but their actions haven't made her happy or grateful in the slightest. She expresses her profound disappointment in them right now, firmly stating that looking down on her husband is no different than looking down on her. She insists that if Zester were truly undeserving of respect, she wouldn't be this angry. Cassia goes on to affirm that Zester is a kind and good-hearted person. She reveals that before their arrival in Ruberno, Zester had repeatedly expressed his excitement about meeting her family and had put in days and nights of thought into selecting their gifts. She can't believe they're treating him this way. Cassia reminds Alan that it's perfectly fine for him to uphold his dignity as a noble, but he should never let it turn into arrogance or diminish his self-worth by belittling others. Cassia then urges them to take a moment to contemplate their actions today if they genuinely want to support her. With a sigh, she calls for Zester to accompany her out of the room. Zester can't help but worry about Alan and Estella, but Cassia doesn't give any indication of turning back, so he has no choice but to leave them there, still sobbing and frightened. In the hallway, Cassia suddenly stops, feeling a pang of guilt that Zester has to endure such an uncomfortable situation and face disrespect for no good reason, especially when her initial intention for visiting Ruberno was simply because she missed her family. Zester, however, can't quite grasp why Cassia is apologizing. He reassures her, saying he's perfectly fine and that there's no need for her to be angry. With a warm smile, Zester goes on to explain that he understands how her family might feel. He tells her to consider it from their perspective. Their beautiful and kind daughter and sister had to marry him and face numerous challenges. It's only natural that they'd be upset. In fact, he believes that if they didn't react this way, it might indicate that she wasn't loved by her family. Zester's gentle tone encourages Cassia not to be too harsh on her siblings. He suggests she lighten up and give them a warm hug. He also expresses his desire to leave a positive impression and convey his gratitude. He promises that he won't act foolishly anywhere else, emphasizing that with her and her beloved family, he's more than willing to take a step back and make extra efforts to be the best he can be. Cassia can't resist wrapping her arms around Zester, expressing her desire for him to be more confident. She makes it clear that if she ever catches him bottling up his emotions again, she'll actually get angry. Zester assures her that he'll be more self-assured in front of others. In that moment, Cassia feels the warmth of Zester's embrace. Despite his strong scent, there's a sweet comfort to it. She realizes that she's starting to develop feelings for Zester, and it makes her a bit sad considering she only has 10 years left. To tease Zester, Cassia plants a playful kiss on his neck, prompting Zester to carry her to put a stop to her teasing. Just by looking at Zester's pleading expression, Cassia can't help but burst into laughter. Later at night, while Cassia is in a meeting with Eon, Zester takes a leisurely stroll around the garden. He hears Alan and Estella's voices nearby and walks over to them, noticing that it's quite chilly outside. He suggests that they put on coats to keep warm. However, Alan maintains his cheeky attitude, prompting Estella to instruct him to apologize. Estella then takes the initiative and apologizes herself for their behavior earlier. Zester, a considerate person, kneels down and tells them there's no need to apologize. Instead, he takes responsibility and expresses his own apologies for unintentionally creating an uncomfortable situation between siblings who haven't seen each other in a while. Estella is struck by Zester's kindness and can't help but wonder why he's such a genuinely nice person. Suddenly, Alan lets out a sneeze, and without hesitation, Zester takes off his own coat and wraps it around the kids to keep them warm. Feeling a bit embarrassed about their earlier behavior, Alan asks if Cassia is still angry with them. Zester reassures them, saying that Cassia is perfectly fine now and they don't need to worry anymore. Curious about how Zester managed to resolve things with Cassia, Estella asks what he said to her. Zester explains that he clarified to Cassia that their rudeness wasn't intentional and that they meant no harm. He emphasizes once more that everything is okay now, and Cassia has forgiven them. Due to the cold, Alan continues to sneeze, and with a concerned expression, Zester suggests that they go back inside. However, Alan insists that he won't get sick from the cold. Estella reminds him that he often falls ill and proposes that he should ask Zester to teach him how to stay healthy, especially since he once expressed a desire to grow taller. Seeing the siblings engaged in a playful argument, Zester smiles and offers his suggestion to exercise as a way for Alan to stay healthy, grow taller, and build a stronger body. Out of nowhere, Estella suddenly asks Zester if he can easily lift Cassia, and Zester confidently responds with a yes, even going as far as bragging that he could probably lift 5 of her. Alan, skeptical, thinks he must be bluffing and challenges Zester to lift him instead. To everyone's amazement, Zester effortlessly lifts Alan, leaving him astonished by Zester's strength. Estella, equally impressed, can't help but marvel at the display. Seeing her reactions, Zester extends his hand and lifts Estella into the air while still holding Alan in the other hand. Caught up in the moment, Estella suggests that Zester can address them casually. This brings a smile to Zester's face, but Alan, blushing, quickly adds that it doesn't mean he fully approves of Zester unless he treats their elder sister well. Zester earnestly promises that he will do his utmost to ensure that Cassia has a happy and fulfilling life in Greece. Meanwhile, Cassia watches with a smile as Zester bonds with her siblings from the room, and Ian can't help but sulk. She then shoots an annoyed look at Ian, questioning why he's visiting when she's there with her husband, making it clear that the meeting doesn't require her presence. Ian avoids her gaze, trying to come up with an explanation. However, a voice from beside him, Rargo, the last descendant of the philosopher family, speaks up. He acknowledges that their visit might not be in line with noble etiquette, but confesses that his eagerness to see her got the better of him. He explains why he's here, to ask Cassia for help with the ancient language. You see, he's really good at figuring out the stuff written on magic stones, but when it comes to that ancient language, he's pretty much lost. Cassia can't help but wonder if this guy is really from a philosopher family that researches magic stones, especially since magic stones won't be useful for another decade. She starts thinking he might just be a scam artist trying to pull a fast one on Haviland, Roberno, and Grease. So, she straight up asks him if he's actually been verified as capable of researching magic stones, mentioning that even she could bluff about things she doesn't know much about, like magicians or philosopher families. Rargo just smiles and tells her not to worry, saying it's totally normal to be suspicious. He wonders how he can prove himself and then drops a bombshell. He tells her about the time he used a top-notch magic stone and claims he brought someone back from the dead. When Cassia asks about how the magic stone works, Rargo breaks it down, saying it's basically like taking a trip back in time and bringing the person back to a moment when they were alive. Cassia is shocked by this revelation and starts to wonder if Rargo is privy to some secret knowledge. Rargo goes on to explain that using the magic stone requires an offering up front, and the type of offering varies depending on the stone's power level. However, for magic akin to god-like power, the price is steep, often requiring something incredibly hard to obtain. As Cassia ponders whether it was reversal magic that brought her there, Rargo adds that there are countless desperate souls in the world who would do anything to harness ancient magic, no matter the cost. After the meeting, Cassia seeks out Rargo. Wanting to delve deeper, Cassia requests a private chat with him. Getting right down to business, she asks Rargo point blank if he knows about her predicament, to which Rargo responds with a simple yes. This revelation rocks Cassia to her core, and she demands to know if Rargo was the one responsible for sending her back in time. Rargo, evading eye contact, admits that he may have had some indirect involvement. Cassia attempts to probe for answers about her situation, but Rargo keeps giving elusive responses. Frustrated, Cassia raises her voice, questioning if Rargo's intention was to deliberately lead her on to uncover the truth. However, Rargo remains composed, explaining it's not quite as straightforward, but he trusts Cassia's intelligence as a savvy baroness to piece things together. This only serves to irritate Cassia further. Rargo continues dropping vague hints, as if he wants Cassia to decipher the hidden meaning behind his words. Cassia, growing increasingly frustrated, demands to know why Rargo didn't just come out and tell her everything from the start. Rargo explains that there are certain magical taboos at play, where it's better for the one who holds the knowledge to stay hands-off, and that person happens to be him. He adds that as a strict rule, Cassia can never uncover the identity of the individual who performed the reversal magic on her, nor can she learn about their motives or the offering involved. Essentially, she's not allowed to know anything about her reversal. Rargo emphasizes that breaking this taboo would result in his death. This revelation leaves Cassia feeling even more desperate and trapped. Even though Rargo mentioned the taboo about revealing the magician's identity to Cassia, he also casually mentioned in her presence that he had pulled off reversal magic once. This sparks a thought in Cassia's mind that his words might be subtle hints. She starts considering the possibility that Rargo himself wasn't the one who directly performed the magic, but rather indirectly got involved in the reversal magic, thus becoming the one holding the crucial knowledge. Rargo lets out a relieved sigh, trusting that Cassia will uncover the necessary information on her own, sparing him the need to break the taboo and delve into specifics. Cassia finds herself pondering Rargo's identity and motives, questioning why he's risking his life to assist her. She gathers the courage to inquire about reversal magic in general, acknowledging that she's aware of the consequences of repeating past events unless she alters her actions. She admits to Rargo that while many aspects of her life have already changed, there are still some things she desperately wants to remain the same. Then, Cassia reveals a deeply personal desire, the safety of her 2 children from her past life, wishing for their safe birth once again. Rargo is taken aback, his expression shifting to one of shock and pallor. With a resolute look, Cassia declares that her children meant the world to her, so it's only natural that she longs to see them once more. In response, Rargo explains that there's a way for her to reunite with her children just as she desires, but it comes with certain conditions. He elaborates, saying that for every living being's birth and death, there's a specific star date assigned by the gods. To ensure she has the same children, the parents' characteristics and the star dates must align perfectly. In other words, the exact same event must occur on the same day. So Cassia needs to pinpoint the exact date her children were conceived, and she has to get down to business with the Baron on that very day. Suddenly, Cassia slams her hand on the table, exclaiming that she knows precisely when her children were conceived, brimming with excitement. Rargo is taken aback, feeling sorry for Cassia that her past relationship must have been painfully distant. However, he expresses relief that her current relationship seems to be much more affectionate. Cassia wonders how Rargo knows about her past so intimately. Rargo then adds another condition, explaining that Cassia must not create a new precedent. If she has another child first, it would mean she didn't choose the destiny of having the same children from her past life. Upon hearing this, Cassia suddenly starts trembling with worry, fearing she might be pregnant right now since her period is late this month. Seeing Cassia's anxious expression, Rargo chuckles and reassures her that she doesn't need to stress about that. He mentions there's a reason he's known as a philosopher, but just as he's about to say more, he suddenly coughs up blood. Cassia panics, asking about his well-being, but Rargo explains that he's all right, attributing the coughing fit to having said something that broke a taboo. Cassia, concerned for Rargo's well-being, insists he doesn't need to continue speaking as he's already answered all her questions. Despite her insistence, Rargo reassures her that she can still ask him more questions. Cassia remains firm, saying it's okay. As she wipes the blood from Rargo's lips, she halts, expressing her worry that he doesn't even realize how risky this is for him, questioning his confidence in answering her inquiries. In response, Rargo smiles brightly, remarking that Cassia truly hasn't changed a bit. Back in her room, Cassia lies on her bed, pondering who might have wished for her return to life. Her father's a logical thinker. Her mother and siblings never had much interest in magic stones, so they wouldn't undertake such a challenging task. Ayan couldn't be the one either. She's completely clueless. Suddenly, Zester gently places his hand on Cassia's head, his expression filled with concern, asking if she has a headache. Taking a moment to contemplate, Cassia wonders if it could have been her husband, as she could envision the man she knows now doing something like that. But she's uncertain if it's the Zester from her past. Zester reminds Cassia not to overexert herself, worrying about her well-being, but Cassia assures him she's fine. She then brings up how she's noticed Zester growing closer to her siblings. At the mention of her siblings, Zester suddenly blushes, mentioning he's become more curious about their future child. Zester beams with happiness as he mentions how thrilled he'd be to have a child who resembles Cassia. He then turns to Cassia, asking whether she'd prefer a son or a daughter. With a smile, Cassia responds that she wants their first child to be a son and their second to be a daughter. She explains that she envisions their son inheriting Zester's traits and their daughter taking after her. Touched by Cassia's words, Zester envelops her in a tight embrace. Cassia reflects on how different Zester is from her past life, noting his newfound chattiness and expressiveness. Out of the blue, Cassia turns to Zester and poses a hypothetical scenario. If she were to die, but Zester found a way to bring her back at an immense cost, would he be willing to pay it to see her again? Zester pauses for a moment, leaving Cassia to think it must be a difficult question for him. However, suddenly, Zester locks eyes with Cassia and asserts that even if she doesn't believe him, he'd willingly sacrifice his life if it meant saving hers. Cassia's cheeks flush with embarrassment at his declaration, but she can't shake the feeling that Zester's words ring true. Cassia tenderly caresses Zester's face before leaning in to kiss him. As their kisses deepen, Cassia can't help but think about the conditions for having the same children as in her past life, reminding herself to be cautious. Suddenly, Zester pulls back, apologizing and expressing guilt, mentioning they're not even in Greece right now, making it feel like he's committed a sin. Upon hearing Zester's reasoning, Cassia remarks that he's peculiar. But to Zester, if Cassia says so, then yes, he's peculiar. He gently assures her that he'll only hold her hand tonight. In Ruberno, time flies by, and before they know it, it's time to bid farewell. As Cassia and Zester are about to leave, Rargo rushes over to Cassia, relieved that he's not too late. Cassia quickly informs him that they need to talk, to which Rargo responds that he also has something to tell her. Zester, Ayan, Cassia's father and mother exchange puzzled looks as they observe Cassia and Rargo. Sensing their confusion, Cassia quickly offers an explanation, suggesting they need to chat privately about deciphering the ancient language on magic stones. During their private moment, Cassia inquires about where Rargo has been all this while. Rargo, wearing a bright smile, shares that he had some business to attend to. He then wonders if Cassia has any further questions for him. However, Cassia clarifies that she simply wants to continue their conversation, not necessarily ask more questions. Rargo's expression falters slightly as he remarks that he's confident they'll cross paths again if fate allows. Cassia can't help but wonder why Rargo is talking as if their reunion is uncertain. Out of the blue, Rargo passes a bottle of pills to Cassia, explaining they're herbal supplements that bolster the body's defenses, a homemade contraceptive. Rargo reassures Cassia of their reliability, citing his reputation as a pharmaceutical whiz in the area. To alleviate any doubts, he even hands Cassia a prescription. Rargo proceeds to outline how to use the pills. Cassia then realizes that Rargo must have been absent for a few days to craft these pills specifically for her. He then turns to Zester to introduce himself, and as they shake hands, Zester's grip is unexpectedly strong. Suddenly, Rargo asks Zester if he could bid farewell in the same way his family does. After receiving permission, Rargo embraces Zester tightly, leaving onlookers bewildered by the unexpected display of affection. However, Cassia notices Rargo's expression, which suggests a familiarity beyond their brief meeting. When Rargo asks if he can do the same to Cassia, Zester promptly declines. But Cassia surprises everyone by embracing Rargo herself. Looking at him, she feels a sense of kinship, akin to a little brother, just like Zester and their beloved son, Verl. Cassia then invites Rargo to visit Grace someday, expressing her gratitude for his help. In the carriage, Cassia gazes at the pills Rargo gave her, her thoughts spinning. She's convinced she's never met him before, yet she can't shake this strange feeling of connection, as if they're old friends. As Cassia remembers Rargo mentioning the pills lasting until she's pregnant with her second child in 5 years, she realizes she never shared that detail with him. It dawns on her that Rargo must have known her in her past life. Meanwhile, Rargo didn't anticipate Cassia posing such a profound question about her children, contemplating the idea of reliving a life she once loathed just for the sake of her kids. He wonders if he and Verl will be able to coexist in this new life. Vaguely, Rargo recalls the moment from the past, when Cassia died, and how Zester apologized for his shortcomings as a father, hinting at something he was about to do. Lost in thought, Rargo suddenly coughs up blood, alarming the others who worry about his well-being. However, he assures them he's okay, inwardly believing he truly is fine as long as it's for the people he loves. It's been 3 months since Cassia arrived in Greece. In that time, a new year has begun, and she celebrated her 19th birthday. Cassia has been getting serious about preparing to launch her wig business. Meanwhile, the Rakan tribe, who set up camp in Rubentlo village close to Grease Castle, and Zester's former mercenary buddies, are now official members of the Grease army. During a break from their training session, Jerome casually brings up Cassia, whom he hasn't seen around lately. Hearing another guy inquire about his wife, Zester starts feeling irritated and a bit jealous. Jerome then mentions how the folks in Grease have been saying that since Cassia arrived, the whole place has improved significantly, making him curious about how bad things were before. Zester admits that he's not exactly cut out for teaching and running the place, having only taken on the castle because the king practically forced him to. He acknowledges that without Cassia, Grease would probably still be in a sorry state, agreeing with what Jerome said. Suddenly, Jerome jokingly claims he's envious, which only exacerbates Zester's irritation. Jerome quickly reassures Zester he's not trying to steal his wife. He just wishes he could find himself a hot wife and start a family with kids as adorable as bunnies, too. This remark prompts Zester to burst into laughter, his cheeks turning bright red with embarrassment. Out of the blue, Paul interrupts Zester, requesting a moment to chat with him. Paul tells Zester that Cassia called a doctor to check on her, and from what he gathered, it seemed like Cassia was asking about the contraceptive pills she brought from Ruberno. Paul admits he wouldn't have known if he hadn't stumbled upon the castle's entry log by chance. Because the issue is delicate, Paul was hesitant to confront Cassia about it. He then looks directly at Zester and asks if Zester is intentionally postponing his plans to have a child. Heirs are a big deal for lords. Just having them around brings stability to a territory and carries a symbolic weight, as they can garner support from the residents. Zester can see why this is making Paul anxious. So Zester lays out his reasoning, explaining that they haven't been married for very long. Cassia is still young, and both of them are swamped with their own tasks. Taking their time isn't going to cause any problems. Zester tries to reassure Paul not to stress over it. But Paul has his own suspicions, wondering if there's something going on between Zester and Cassia that's making Cassia think this way. Late at night in their chamber, Zester notices Cassia engrossed in studying. He approaches her and asks why she's reading up on the history of empire wars while studying a map. Cassia is taken aback for a moment, realizing she can't exactly spill the beans to Zester about the impending territory war that's just a few months away. Territorial wars serve as chances for lords to keep tabs on each other and solidify their standings, and putting a halt to the war itself won't be easy. Cassia then queries Zester about what they would do if a war were to break out in Greece, how they could minimize harm to the ordinary residents. Considering her question, Zester gestures to a mountain on the map and explains that to safeguard their territory and people, they'd likely have to engage in battle in that mountain pass between Varnin and Grease. However, he also elaborates on another possibility. If it were a territory war, the standard approach would be to infiltrate the castle to seize trophies and force the lord to surrender. Out of the blue, Cassia brings up the strategy Zester used during the Empire War, wondering if he could apply it to the Varnin Canyons. Confused, Zester asks if Cassia is suggesting they invade Varnin and kickstart a territory war. Cassia is taken aback and quickly explains that's not what she meant. It just popped into her head while studying. Zester questions why she's suddenly studying that topic. Trying to reassure him, Cassia mentions she became curious after hearing about his achievements during the Empire War and thought he was pretty cool, so she looked into it. Upon hearing this, Zester's face suddenly flushes red. Just as they're about to lean in for a kiss, Zester's mind flashes back to what Paul mentioned earlier about Cassia taking contraceptive pills. He suddenly pulls away, avoiding physical contact, and suggests they just go to bed. Sensing something off with Zester, Cassia asks if everything is okay, but Zester insists that nothing's wrong. Despite Zester's attempts to brush it off, Cassia keeps pressing him to share what's bothering him. Eventually, with tears welling up in his eyes, Zester musters the courage to ask if Cassia doesn't want to have his children. Taken aback by his question, Cassia wonders where this is all coming from. Zester explains about the contraceptive pills Paul mentioned, his expression growing solemn as he recalls how Cassia seemed displeased when she first arrived in Grease. Cassia tries to comprehend what Zester is implying, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as she asks if it seems like she hates him now. Zester quickly reassures Cassia that she doesn't seem like she hates him. However, he's curious about why she's taking those pills. Unable to share her true reason, Cassia admits that she's feeling a bit scared since she's still young and uncertain if she'd be ready to be a good mother right now, especially with other worries on her mind. She suggests they take their time until she settles into life there, proposing they consider trying for a child in about 2 years. Excitedly, Zester agrees upon hearing Cassia's explanation. With a warm gaze, Zester tells Cassia that she should have just been honest with him about her feelings. Cassia agrees, promising to be truthful with each other to avoid misunderstandings and hurt feelings. Zester reciprocates the promise and gently kisses Cassia's hand. Seeing how Zester reacts with tears, laughter, and worry to every word she says, Cassia wonders where the war-obsessed Zester has disappeared to. Suddenly feeling bold, Cassia pushes Zester onto the bed and straddles him. Tenderly touching his face, she assures him that they've cleared up any misunderstandings. But then Zester surprises her by swiftly flipping their positions, turning Cassia onto the bed. Blushing furiously, Zester takes off his shirt and gazes at Cassia, confessing that she drives him crazy. He begins by kissing her cheek, then her lips, and their passionate night together unfolds. Meanwhile, in Axios, Count Axios is lost in thought, contemplating how Cassia has occupied his mind. He acknowledges that Cassia was someone worth his attention but has now become another man's wife. Reflecting on the situation, he realizes that he was the one who ended any possibility of a relationship from the start. Count Axios feels a twinge of regret over his decision. Suddenly, someone interrupts his deep thoughts. It's a sorcerer named Eunice, who correctly guesses that Count Axios is thinking about Cassia, the woman he recently encountered. Eunice happens to be the world's last living sorcerer descendant, as well as Count Axios' secret aide and top retainer. Eunice expresses her surprise at Axios, the supposed hero of the Empire and honorable nobleman, now fretting over another man's wife, stating that he's acting out of character. Chuckling at Eunice's observation, Axios disagrees, saying he very much is himself, and that he simply wants everything within his reach to make himself perfect. Eunice questions how he can be so sure about it when he's just met Cassia. Axios insists that his intuition has never failed him. Upon hearing this, Eunice pulls out some stones and offers her help to make his wish come true. But Axios refuses, asking why he would ever sell his soul just to have one woman, asserting that he'll manage just fine without the help of such crude methods. Eunice expresses her hope that he'll struggle until the day he seeks her help. Taking a sip of his drink, Axios mentions that if he can't have Cassia, then so be it, and he won't sacrifice himself as an offering. Eunice hints that there may already be souls who willingly sacrifice themselves as offerings for Cassia. Axios' expression changes to disbelief upon hearing this. Eunice continues, asserting that the souls entrusted to her will be the first to enter the paradise soon to be created by their god, Remiel, claiming they will attain honor. In this empire, most people worship the god Orobas, but there are also those who follow the other god, Remiel. They turn souls into offerings and deal in ancient magic, akin to dealing with the devil. Count Axios then decides that he should visit Greece himself after all. He admits he's become as intrigued as Eunice, both by his current state and by Cassia. So, he's determined to go and see Cassia for himself. The letter from Count Axios has arrived in Greece, and Zester is feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He shares the news with Cassia, who's busy with her work. Zester starts comparing himself to Count Axios, highlighting how amazing the Count is compared to him. Cassia finds Zester's inferiority complex annoying and tells him to stop talking about Count Axios. She doesn't find those stories interesting or touching. Cassia encourages Zester to focus on becoming a respectable leader instead of feeling ashamed of his title as Lord. She advises him not to dwell on how amazing and incomparable Count Axios seems, but rather to concentrate on becoming a great leader who can surpass him. Playfully squeezing Zester's cheeks, Cassia reminds him to focus on those thoughts only. Cassia comments that it's good that Zester wants to maintain friendly relations with the Northern Lords, but she doesn't understand why he trusts and follows Count Axios so much. Despite whatever Zester says about Axios, Cassia knows from experience that he isn't trustworthy. The fact that the most prominent noble in the North did something so despicable indicates that not only does he disrespect Zester, but also this small territory. Cassia advises Zester that the world can be a scary and unforgiving place, so he shouldn't trust anyone but himself. She explains that by the time he realizes he's been betrayed, it'll be too late and he'll be left broken. With his pleading puppy eyes, Zester seeks confirmation, questioning if he really shouldn't trust anyone, not even her. Cassia pauses, considering whether there are conditions for trustworthiness. She concludes that one prerequisite is living honestly and transparently, which means she herself isn't trustworthy, as she has no intention of revealing her time travel secret, her impending death in 10 years, or her plans for those years. Therefore, Cassia gives Zester a straightforward yes, indicating that he shouldn't trust her either. However, Zester declares he won't do that, insisting on trusting her unconditionally. He even goes as far as saying he'd willingly drink poison if Cassia gave it to him, or accept his fate if she were to betray him. Zester emphasizes that this is his sincerity and unwavering commitment, representing both his trust and loyalty. It's his oath to dedicate himself entirely to Cassia. While kissing Cassia's hand, Zester promises that he will remain loyal to her for the rest of his life. Paul enters with some new maids to introduce to Cassia. Among them, Cassia is surprised to see one maid who had stayed by her side until the end in her previous life. She hadn't expected to meet her at the castle yet, considering she wasn't supposed to be hired there. Cassia reflects on how different her current life is compared to her past one, where she was penniless and could only afford a few servants. Now, with financial support from the Northern Lords and assistance from her father, Cassia has the means to hire more help. So, she asked Paul to hire additional servants with the funds she received. Cassia hadn't realized that such a small request could lead to her meeting with her trusted maid happening sooner than expected. Paul interrupts Cassia's reverie, introducing the new commuter maids. Cassia's gaze lingers on one maid with longing eyes, prompting Paul to inquire if she wants someone to stay by her side. Stepping closer to the maid she was fixated on, Cassia asks for her name. The maid, Clara, is pleasantly surprised and expresses her happiness as she introduces herself. Holding Clara's hand, Cassia beams and remarks that she feels they're going to be close friends. Clara is taken aback by Cassia's warmth, but expresses her gratitude for the kind words and promises to do her best. Clara Holton, once a commoner from Varnan, enjoyed a comfortable upbringing as her father was a subcontractor for a prominent merchant group owned by Viscount Varnan. However, her life took a turn for the worse when she was forced to marry Matthew Holton, a man 10 years her senior and the son of her father's friend, as part of her father's plans to expand his business to Greece. Initially, Clara found solace in her father's prosperous business in Greece, allowing her to support herself when her alcoholic husband was incapable. However, her life unraveled after the territory war, leading to a cessation of northern business exchanges and leaving Clara without a livelihood. Compounded by the difficulty of divorcing under imperial law and the loss of financial support from her father, Clara was left stranded with no means of returning to Varnan. Forced to find a way to support herself, Clara ultimately became a maid at Grease Castle in Cassia's past life. Cassia empathized with Clara's plight, seeing parallels between their lives, but while Cassia's husband was indifferent, Clara faced abuse from her spouse, Matthew Holton. During their tea break, Cassia encourages Clara to join her for some tea and cake. Clara initially hesitates, but Cassia insists, and Clara eventually agrees, enjoying the treat. Another reason Cassia held Clara in high regard was because Clara was the only one in the castle brave enough to confront Vita. Suddenly, Cassia brings up a question about Clara's family. Taken aback by the sudden question, Clara coughs and admits she has a husband. Cassia wonders if Clara's husband forced her to work there, but realizes she can't ask about it during their first meeting. As Clara cleans the table, Cassia notices a bruise on her hand. Concerned, Cassia asks about it, but Clara nervously brushes it off, claiming she hurt herself while cooking. Pulling her hand away, Clara asks to clean the table and leave the room. Cassia feels worried about Clara's situation and becomes angry with her husband. Frustrated, Cassia feels the urge to do something about it, prioritizing it over her resolution to enjoy life and relax. 1 week later, the castle is buzzing with preparations for Count Axios' arrival. Meanwhile, Cassia lies on her bed, contemplating her completed preparations for her wig business. All that's left now is advertising. Coincidentally, the first princess, Iskria Simone, is set to celebrate her birthday in the capital soon. It's a time of grand festivities where both nobles and common folk converge to revel in food, drink, and merriment. The capital serves as the ideal platform for advertising. Looking ahead, Cassia realizes the importance of fostering relationships not only with northern nobles, but also with those in the capital. While distributing wigs is one aspect, maintaining correspondence with nobility is crucial if they wish to elevate their impoverished territory status. Cassia realizes that she must elevate Grease's status to ensure her family's prosperity there. She sees the princess's birthday bash as the perfect opportunity for publicity. But here's the problem. She can't attend without an invite. In her previous life, Grease never got one from the imperial family. To get an invitation, a noble must hail from a powerful family. Only lords holding the rank of count and higher get invites to imperial family events. Cassia ponders whether to approach her father for help, but she quickly dismisses the idea, knowing his disdain for the emperor due to the marriage arrangement. As she contemplates how to secure the imperial invitation, she also dwells on Clara's situation. Despite Cassia's attempts to express concern, Clara continues to evade discussing her circumstances. Cassia recognizes that involving Zester would be necessary if she were to take formal action against Clara's husband. Cassia notices a change in Zester from her past life but still hesitates to discuss it with him. However, his recent behavior gives her confidence. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door and Zester enters, informing Cassia about Count Axios' arrival. Approaching her on the bed, Zester compliments her, catching her off guard. Then, he unexpectedly asks for a kiss, planting one on her lips before she can respond, reaffirming her cuteness. Cassia sits up on the bed and explains to Zester that she's not feeling up to greeting Count Axios and asks him to go alone. Zester expresses concern, wondering if Cassia is feeling unwell. Cassia reassures him that she's okay, just not in the mood. She then stands up and with a sudden surge of curiosity about Zester's feelings, she smiles at him and calls his name gently. Cassia begins by talking about her original plan to relax when she first arrived in Greece, but confesses that she's been swamped with work lately. She explains that when she's feeling overwhelmed, all she wants to do is lay down and take a break. However, Cassia struggles to express what she really wants to tell Zester. Understanding her feelings, Zester agrees and assures her that she doesn't need to worry about anything right now, mentioning that he's also been learning about her business ventures. Feeling frustrated that her thoughts aren't coming out clearly, Cassia decides to just ask Zester directly if she can visit the capital. At that moment, Zester realizes that this isn't just a casual request, especially considering the upcoming birthday celebrations of the first princess. Cassia looks at Zester with pleading eyes, asking for his permission. Touched by her sincerity, Zester smiles and agrees without hesitation. Excitedly, Cassia suggests to Zester that they should arrive in time for the princess's birthday celebrations. However, Zester seems discouraged but agrees nonetheless. Trying to change the subject, Zester mentions Clara, expressing his relief that she's found someone to connect with while he's unable to be there for her. As they discuss Clara, Cassia remembers that she wanted to discuss Clara's situation with Zester, feeling determined to confront Clara's husband. Making sure that residents face consequences for their actions isn't just a perk of being the Lord. It's also a way to show authority and respect. That's why Zester's role as Lord is crucial. He's responsible for upholding that dignity. Cassia then asks Zester how he deals with residents who break the rules. Zester seems a bit surprised by the question, especially since Greece is made up of only 2 small villages. He explains that he's never really had to intervene much since the folks there are pretty straightforward and honest. But then Cassia's tone changes, and she brings up the serious issue of abusive husbands who force themselves on their wives and engage in harmful behavior. She questions whether they should just stand by and do nothing because it's a problem within a marriage. Zester is taken aback by the sudden seriousness of the conversation and expresses disbelief that such people exist. He says that if they ever received a report like that, he'd need to carefully consider the situation. After hearing Zester's response, Cassia gently reminds him about Axios' arrival and suggests that he should go greet him. She adds that she'll take her time getting ready and join them around lunchtime. Surprisingly, those words seem to uplift Zester's mood. Watching Axios' carriage arrive in Greece from her room window, Cassia can't help but wonder why he would bother visiting a rural territory like this. But now that she's in her 29th year, she sees people differently, recognizing that they'll go to great lengths to achieve their goals. Axios was willing to send a letter and rush over to Greece himself, even though there's not much to see here. With Greece now having its own military and looking more developed, Cassia ponders whether Axios is seeking to establish a relationship with the territory. Suddenly, Cassia's eyes meet Axios's, and he smiles at her. Startled, she quickly closes the curtains, feeling annoyed by the unexpected encounter. As they walk inside the castle, Axios remarks to Zester that it's been 2 years since their last meeting, noting how busy Zester seems to have been. Zester smiles brightly and mentions that his wife wanted to visit Ruberno. This surprises Axios, and he laughs in response. The Count becomes increasingly intrigued, realizing that Cassia must have transformed the once reserved Zester into a new person. He grows even more curious about Cassia, wondering just how remarkable of a woman she truly is. Zester Grease, a member of the renowned mercenary company Jackal, was noticed by Verl Axios for his leadership among the mercenaries. Jackal, composed of skilled commoner mercenaries, was indispensable to the nobility in Kashitra, the capital, often hired for various tasks, including guarding, errands, and suppressing coups. Despite their talent, Jackal's increasing influence led to tensions with the nobility. Zester, considered their leader, managed to bridge the gap between the mercenaries and the nobles, ultimately securing Jackal's inclusion in the imperial forces during the Empire War. Zester's diplomacy spared Jackal from pestering nobles for rewards post-war, and instead, he was granted the title of war hero and a minor noble title by the Emperor, a relatively small price for the significant contributions made. From now on, I'm going to make some minor changes. We'll be calling Count Axios by his first name, Verl. Seeing Verl lost in thought, Zester nudges him and asks what's on his mind. Verl then reminisces about their first meeting and jokingly asks if Zester's newfound chattiness is thanks to his young and charming wife. Surprised, Zester confidently replies that he's been trying to be more vocal lately, as his wife enjoys it. Verl seems skeptical, silently thinking that Cassia was definitely too good of a catch for Zester. The Emperor initially intended to send Cassia to Axios, but that idea went out the window when Verl turned her down flat. He was determined to pick the perfect lady for Verl, and if nobody fit the bill, he was fine with leaving the position empty forever. Verl had reservations about Cassia because of her noble status as a count's firstborn, fearing it would cause drama. Now Verl can only kick himself, realizing that Cassia is the kind of woman who would have really caught his eye. While discussing Cassia's business ventures, Verl privately mulls over the idea that Cassia would have been more successful if she had partnered with him instead, wondering if fate spared Zester from the harshness of battle. Interrupting his thoughts, Zester suggests they grab a meal together. Verl eagerly mentions his anticipation of meeting the impressive Baroness, admitting that he couldn't forget her after their brief encounter. Zester's demeanor suddenly darkens at Verl's words. Sensing the tension, Verl pats Zester's shoulder and clarifies that his admiration for Cassia stems from her rumored beauty. Realizing Zester's sensitivity towards his wife, Verl tries to smooth things over, but Zester remains visibly annoyed as he struggles to maintain his composure. In the dining room, Cassia, Paul, and the chef are already waiting. Cassia warmly greets Verl, reintroducing herself as Cassia Grease. As soon as Cassia speaks, Verl's heart begins to race, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. It's more than mere curiosity. It's a familiar, intense feeling, reminiscent of when he desired Eunice with her mystical powers, or when he made the decision to bring in Zester, the leader of Jackal. Verl finds it troubling, as he hadn't anticipated this, never expecting to covet another man's wife. Meanwhile, Zester feels a sense of unease, despite everything seeming normal. He can't shake the suffocating feeling in his heart, wondering what's causing it. Verl then brings up the topic of Cassia adjusting to life in Greece, assuming it must be tough for her. But Cassia quickly counters, saying she's actually quite content living there, finding more things to like about Greece than her previous home in Ruberno. Verl seems skeptical, so he asks Cassia to elaborate. Cassia points out how much she enjoys the weather and the breathtaking scenery that never fails to captivate her. However, Verl boasts about the scenery in his own territory, insisting it's even better than Greece, and extends an invitation for Cassia to visit Axios. However, when Verl asks Cassia if that's the only thing she likes about Greece, Cassia, with a smile, replies that there's more to it. She mentions how the people of Greece are genuinely honest and kind, and every staff member at their castle is not only intelligent but also friendly. Cassia adds that she always looks forward to mealtimes thanks to their talented chef. With a slight blush on her cheek, Cassia is about to reveal the biggest reason she loves Greece when she locks eyes with Zester, who seems both excited and nervous, as if anticipating her words. Pausing for a moment, Cassia continues, expressing her desire to live happily ever after with Zester. Unable to contain his happiness any longer, Zester can't help but show his joy. Verl, unable to believe what Cassia just said, glances at Zester, wondering if Cassia is into that himbo. He then brings up Cassia and Zester's close relationship, to which Cassia readily agrees. Despite this, Cassia can't shake off her annoyance towards Verl. However, Verl, in his cunning and immature manner, decides to drop a bombshell. He reveals a secret known only to him and the Emperor. He discloses that Cassia was originally intended to be his wife, not Zester's. This revelation shocks both Cassia and Zester. To make matters worse, Verl adds that the Emperor considered Cassia a suitable mistress for Axios, believing no one was better suited for him than her. Cassia, just learning this information, begins to realize that something must be amiss with her being sent to a mere rural territory, especially considering her prestigious background as the daughter of the Ruberno family, a major power in the south. Verl continues, explaining that he wasn't interested in Cassia back then because he believes one should be cautious around beautiful women, so he turned her down. He adds that his opinion hasn't changed, and if Cassia were his wife, he doubts he'd ever leave the castle. Cassia, increasingly irritated, tells Verl that his words are offensive to both her and Zester. Although Verl apologizes, his expression shows no sign of genuine regret. He even takes the opportunity to mock Zester, who seems oblivious to the situation. Verl then tells Zester to admit that he was unworthy of being involved with a prestigious family like Roberno, despite his significant achievements during the war. Zester exits the room, his mind a jumble as he walks through the hallway. Cassia rushes after him, offering comfort and reassurance that none of what Verl said matters anymore. Taking a firmer approach this time, she slaps Zester's face and tells him to snap out of it. Despite her efforts, Zester's confidence is shattered, admitting that Verl might have a point in questioning his worthiness. He feels like a fool for not considering these things sooner, and believes there's no valid reason for someone like Cassia to be with him. Seeing Zester's spirit crumbling, Cassia takes a bold step, grabbing his shirt and kissing him passionately on the lip. After their lips part, Cassia expresses relief that she's with Zester in Greece, admitting that the thought of Verl accepting the Emperor's order terrifies her. She emphasizes that she likes Zester 1,000 times more than she does the Count. Suddenly, Zester sweeps Cassia off her feet, surprising her. He tries to reassure himself that Cassia is now his wife and that she said she likes him, so he shouldn't care about anything else. Zester declares that if Cassia were to disappear, he would follow her to the ends of the earth because he can't imagine life without her. He admits that he's being selfish but hopes Cassia understands that he simply can't let her go now. He confesses that he doesn't want to leave the castle anymore, not just because of her beauty, but because of who she is at her core. While giving Verl a tour of Gree's castle, Zester also fills him in on the situation. However, Verl seems lost in his own thoughts, realizing how Greece has such formidable military strength despite being a small territory. Not only does Zester have monstrous beasts, but he also has the backing of Jackal, the mercenary guild. Suddenly, Zester asks if Verl has been invited to the princess's birthday celebrations. Nervously, Zester then requests if he could also congratulate the princess on her birthday. Verl is surprised by Zester's sudden request as it's out of character for him. He teases Zester, suggesting he's trying to make a splash in noble society now that Greece is gaining power. However, Zester shyly explains that Cassia has been wanting to visit the imperial palace, and since he feels incapable of taking her himself, he's shamelessly asking Verl for help. Meanwhile, in her room, Cassia's maid enters, but instead of Clara, it's another maid who explains that Clara is on vacation and she's filling in for her. Cassia appears puzzled, and the maid elaborates, mentioning that the butler was quite upset about it due to the short notice. Knowing Clara's nature, Cassia doubts she would have taken time off without a good reason. Suddenly, Cassia becomes apprehensive, realizing that something might have happened to Clara, leaving her feeling worried. The Lord has control over most affairs in the territory, but certain situations must abide by Empire law without exceptions, like marriage and divorce. In the Empire, unless both husband and wife agree, divorce is a no-go. According to the Orobas religion, which is the official faith of the Empire, your spouse is considered your soulmate, and it's believed you stay together even after death. So, even if one of you passes away unexpectedly, you're still legally married. Because of this, many noble couples prepare divorce papers just in case. In Cassia's previous life, she tried everything to break up Matthew and Clara. But naturally, Matthew refused to divorce, and it wasn't easy to get him out of the picture either. Not only was Zester, the lord of the territory, disinterested in managing territory matters, but he also rarely stayed at the castle for more than a week. He was practically like a wandering mercenary on the battlefield. However, this time, Cassia is determined to ask Zester to assert his authority properly. While walking down the hallway, Cassia bumps into Verl. She tries to keep it brief by giving a quick greeting and moving on, but Verl stops her and asks if she's still upset about what happened yesterday. Cassia, smiling but hiding her true feelings, insists that she's not mad at all. Verl continues to apologize, but Cassia reassures him that it's okay. Growing annoyed, Cassia abruptly announces that she needs to leave. As she tries to walk away, she accidentally trips while avoiding Verl's foot. Just as she's about to fall, Verl catches her. Cassia quickly tells him to let her go. Zester, who's been searching for Verl, approaches with a stern expression. He informs Verl about a meeting with his jackal subordinates that they had discussed earlier, telling Verl to wait for him in the room. Sensing Zester's displeasure, Verl hastily assures him that he wasn't trying to flirt with Zester's wife. After Verl leaves, Cassia, with a concerned expression, reassures Zester that Verl only helped her when she almost fell, nothing more. Despite her reassurance, Zester still appears uneasy, which worries Cassia. She then mentions that she's looking for Paul to inquire about Clara, reassuring Zester that she can handle it on her own, and he can go see Verl. However, as Cassia begins to walk, her ankle starts hurting, causing Zester to panic. Without hesitation, he scoops Cassia up, making her blush, and promises to take her to Paul. As Zester carries Cassia to his study, he finally admits that he lied when he said he wasn't mad at all. He clarifies that he's not mad at Cassia or Verl because he knows Verl's help prevented Cassia from getting hurt even more. Zester struggles to put his feelings into words, but confesses that he can't stand the thought of anyone else touching Cassia, and fears he'll lose control if it happens again. With teary eyes, Zester admits he's become obsessed with Cassia, and worries she might want to leave him because of who he's become. He also asks Cassia what she thinks of Verl, but Cassia reassures him, saying that Verl is not her type, and Cassia's response lifts Zester's spirits. Cassia then tells Zester not to get too attached to her, warning him that if something were to happen to her, he'd be devastated. Hearing this, Zester refuses to accept the idea, insisting that she won't be able to leave him against her will. Despite Cassia suggesting Zester not to get too fond of her, his statement brings her happiness. Zester goes further, expressing his determination to hold on to her, even if it means making a pact with the devil. Eventually, they arrive at Zester's study where Paul is working. After carefully seating Cassia, Zester instructs Paul to call a physician to check on her once they're done talking. Cassia tries to downplay her sprained ankle, assuring Zester that she's fine and encouraging him to go. Though hesitant, Zester reluctantly leaves Cassia. Paul is astonished at how Zester's demeanor has completely changed from what he knew. Cassia then becomes serious as she inquires about Clara. At that moment, Paul's expression also turns serious, indicating that he has something important to tell her about Clara. Paul then begins to share his thoughts about Clara. Despite conducting strict hiring processes for the servants, he's surprised and disappointed that Clara would suddenly take leave after only 2 weeks without providing a valid reason. Paul acknowledges Cassia's fondness for Clara, but suggests they consider terminating her employment due to her growing irresponsibility. Hearing Paul's perspective, Cassia appears saddened, but understands his concerns about Clara's behavior. However, Cassia shares her own perspective, praising Paul as the most brilliant employee she's ever encountered and acknowledging his dedication to his work. She empathizes with Paul, expressing her trust in his judgment. Cassia questions whether someone who Paul trusted and hired would genuinely announce a sudden leave without a solid reason. She suggests that perhaps Clara might be facing difficulties she can't easily discuss. Cassia emphasizes that her defense of Clara isn't solely because of their relationship, but stems from her belief in giving people the benefit of the doubt and understanding their circumstances. Cassia also emphasizes the need to understand and be considerate of their servants first if she wants them to serve her with confidence. Paul is surprised by Cassia's explanation, remembering his time working at the Imperial Palace where each master had a unique personality. Some treated their employees poorly, like personal servants, while others didn't. The loyalty of the employees varied depending on who they served. Paul believes that anyone would be motivated to serve someone like Cassia wholeheartedly. Cassia then advises Paul to be more cautious in how he oversees those under his supervision. Paul agrees, admitting that he lost his temper. He promises Cassia that he will visit Clara's residence today to investigate what's going on. Cassia instructs Paul that if he meets Clara, he should reassure her not to worry, and that Cassia would like to speak with her at the castle tomorrow. Accepting the task, Paul feels a sense of relief, grateful for the opportunity to serve such a considerate lady. Meanwhile, in another room, Zester and his reliable jackal subordinates are having a meeting with Verl. One of the jackals excitedly shares how his first paycheck in Greece allowed him to take his wife and kids out for a meal, and they received so much praise. He credits Cassia for this. The other jackals chime in, sharing similar experiences when Paul and Cassia bid them farewell. Hearing this, Zester is taken aback. The jackals mention that Cassia purposely came to see them off, which made them realize their dedication to her. Additionally, Gregory, one of the jackals, mentions how he told Cassia the pay was too generous, as they fight out of loyalty to their leader, and she didn't need to go that far. However, Cassia's response surprised them. This leaves Zester feeling torn between curiosity about Cassia's response and anxious. Gregory then echoes what Cassia said to them, emphasizing that everyone who works in Greece deserves fair pay for their efforts, and the best treatment, considering they risk their lives on the battlefield. Recalling Cassia's words, the jackals are deeply moved and even pledge to protect Cassia no matter what. They proudly declare their loyalty to her and feel inspired to work even harder. They mention that their lives are finally improving since Cassia promised them stable support, and they believe that other members of Jackal will come and settle down in Greece as well. Upon hearing their explanation, Verl realizes that Cassia understands exactly what Greece needs. He's amazed that she managed to enlist Jackal, a group not known for their loyalty, into her military so effortlessly. Verl then adds that Zester's luckiest break was marrying Cassia, and the jackals wholeheartedly agree. Out of the blue, one of the jackals advises Verl to speed up and find a mistress for Axios. Verl responds coolly, saying he's patiently waiting for the right person to become Axios' mistress, confessing that he's been feeling lonely lately. This revelation makes Zester a bit uneasy, especially upon hearing that Verl's questioning stems from witnessing Zester marry such a beautiful and intelligent wife. Gregory reassures him that he'll find someone just as incredible as Cassia. Thanking Greg, Verl acknowledges that it won't be easy to find someone like the Baroness. He advises against being hasty, especially considering his position as the ruler of a large territory. Verl then shares a tale about the Burt Emperor, known as the most virtuous ruler of the Burt Empire. As the eldest son, he became the crown prince but never married until he ascended to the imperial throne. It's said that whenever asked about an empress, he always gave the same response. There was only one woman perfect enough to rule the empire alongside him, and he refused to marry anyone else. However, the issue was that this woman was already married to another man. She was Urabel, the wife of Duke Palash, and she was the one who established foreign trade in the Burt Empire and devised the plan to unite all neighboring kingdoms. She eventually became Empress Urabel Burt. Burt eventually managed to make Duchess Urabel his empress. History tells us that she achieved countless things after becoming empress. It's widely agreed that making Urabel his empress was one of Burt's best decisions. Unfortunately, Duke Palash's heartbreaking tale of seeing his wife taken away from him was never officially recorded in Burt's history books. Later that night, after the dinner party, Zester had a bit too much to drink. And now he's getting pretty drunk. With his subordinates helping him walk, he keeps calling out Cassia's name, promising to do better, which embarrasses Cassia. Once they're inside their room, as Zester lies on the bed still intoxicated, he continues calling Cassia's name. Cassia wonders if Verl said something absurd again that led Zester to drink so much. With a sorrowful expression, Zester pleads with Cassia not to abandon him. Cassia reassures him that she won't leave him. Pulling her closer, Zester confesses that he's never felt jealous of those born into nobility, nor has he pitied himself. However, since Cassia arrived, his perspective has shifted. He admits to resenting his background multiple times a day, wishing he were born into nobility so he could confidently stand by her side. Zester expresses his desire to become a good man worthy of Cassia. He begs Cassia to guide him, promising to do his best. Zester then seals Cassia's lips with a warm kiss before asking her what he needs to do to prove himself as a trustworthy husband worthy of her love. He genuinely wants to know. Meanwhile, Paul is on his way to visit Clara. When he arrives, he knocks on the door, and Matthew, Clara's husband, opens it in a drunken state. After Paul introduces himself as a butler from the castle, Matthew calls for Clara. Clara emerges with bruises on her face and is surprised to see Paul. As Paul steps inside the house, he notices the mess around. He asks Clara if her break is because of her injuries and if she's hurting anywhere else. Clara mentions that she can still work but is unsure about serving the madam in her current condition. Paul reassures Clara not to worry about that and invites her to stop by the castle tomorrow. He emphasizes that if Clara needs help or doesn't want to bear her burdens alone, she shouldn't hesitate to ask. Clara's eyes fill with tears upon hearing this. Paul also admits to being upset with Clara before coming there and apologizes for not considering her personal circumstances. He reveals that Cassia's kind words calmed him down and made him feel ashamed. Paul once again encourages Clara to come to the castle tomorrow, suggesting that Cassia might be able to assist her in ways he can't. Overwhelmed with emotion, Clara agrees to come, crying heavily. The next morning, Clara arrives at the castle as promised. Cassia hands her a paper, a crime report, with Cassia listed as the declarant and Clara's husband as the accused. Clara is shocked as she reads the document, worrying that it won't be easy to punish Matthew under Empire law. Trembling, Clara admits that her husband terrifies her. But Cassia assures her not to worry, saying that Greece has its own laws, and she trusts her husband for this matter. Additionally, Cassia gives Clara the divorce papers, stating that she'll ensure Clara has an amicable divorce, and that Matthew will be punished for his actions. However, Cassia acknowledges the possibility of Matthew harassing Clara again, so she offers Clara the option to move into the castle once everything is settled and worked as a live-in maid. Clara realizes that her marriage was torture, and she felt like she couldn't even muster the courage to escape it. The only advice her own father gave her was to try to win her husband's favor. But now Cassia is offering her a freedom that feels too good to be true. Meanwhile, in Zester's study, he's going through the crime report Cassia gave him. He remembers Cassia's words about wanting to see him govern the territory like a respected leader. Zester is shocked and asks Paul if such garbage exists in their territory. Paul confirms, saying he saw it firsthand yesterday and mentions the signs of abuse still visible on Clara's body as evidence. When the Emperor granted Zester the territory of Greece, it was small and unremarkable. There were only 2 villages and their only claim to fame was a 0% crime rate until now. But now they had a scumbag like Matthew, who happened to be Clara's husband, the maid Cassia valued the most. Just the thought of it frustrates Zester. He realizes that he has the authority to decide punishments for residents as the Lord, but the problem lies in the ridiculous Empire laws. Zester knows this isn't what Cassia would want, so he decides to issue instructions to arrest Matthew immediately. Against Cassia's expectations, Zester's ability to take action was remarkable. Matthew was swiftly arrested and detained at the castle. Zester, along with Paul and Clara, has gathered in the study to discuss Matthew's punishment. This indicates that Zester considers the issue to be highly significant. Meanwhile, Cassia finds herself obliged to dine with Verl as their honored guest. She seizes this opportunity to broach the topic of territorial conflicts. With a stoic expression, Cassia reveals her newfound interest in war history, spurred by her husband's achievements. She admits to delving into the subject recently, finding both small-scale skirmishes and large-scale conflicts fascinating. Cassia reflects on the concept of necessary war, finding it paradoxical, and questions why innocent civilians have to suffer and die because of war. She expresses empathy for kingdoms that have faded into history due to the ravages of war, feeling remorseful for their lost legacies. Upon hearing Cassia's sentiments, Verl responds with a flirtatious remark, suggesting that her thoughts are as stunning as her appearance. It appears he seizes every opportunity to flirt with Cassia. Their conversation shifts to the topic of territorial conflicts, discussing how they can erupt when smaller territories band together to challenge a larger one. Additionally, they mention instances where a powerful territory initiates wars strategically to bolster their influence, indicating that territorial wars aren't solely about expanding one's land. Verl adds that surprise invasions, without any prior warning or agreement, often aim to annihilate everything in their path. Cassia reflects on her past life, remembering how Grease, already struggling and unattractive, became even more desolate due to these unexpected invasions. She muses that it's been a while since the northern regions experienced a territorial conflict, wondering aloud if it's time for tensions to rise again. With a smug grin, Verl questions whether any lords would dare to challenge Axios, given his formidable presence. Cassia now comprehends why Verl faced betrayal from the Varnan and Vita alliance in her previous life. His overconfidence and complacency are glaringly evident. The Northern Territories are known for their strong individualistic tendencies, with few historical records indicating any alliances between them. This lack of unity proved to be the North's downfall, leading to Verl's territory facing invasion from the Varnan and Vita alliance. This realization prompts Cassia to reflect on how their alliance never extended beyond Grease, highlighting Zester's remarkable leadership compared to Verl's. However, Cassia isn't merely seeking victory in this situation. Her main concern is to ensure that Grease remains unaffected by the impending territorial conflict and doesn't become embroiled in the war. Verl wonders why Cassia is bringing up the topic, and she explains that she believes it's time for Axios, the most influential force in the north, to boost its power. Verl then questions if Cassia is suggesting that Axios should kick off a territory war to prove its superiority, and whether Grease plans to support him. Cassia confirms this without hesitation. He then remarks that such a plan would only favor Grease, considering its current growth. He questions what he would gain from initiating a territory war. But before Cassia can even attempt to persuade him, Verl declares that he'll gladly go along with whatever she wants. He suggests that it's okay if Cassia wants to take advantage of him. Stepping closer to Cassia, he mentions that he sees no reason to be concerned about Grease's expansion. With a gaze fixed on Cassia, he declares that if Grease's growth becomes bothersome, he can simply put an end to it. As he touches Cassia's chin, Verl expresses his willingness to cooperate with Cassia's cunning plan. He even asserts that eventually, Grease, Cassia, and everything else will belong to him. Back in her room, Cassia becomes annoyed with Verl. In her previous life, Verl started showing interest in her after she wholeheartedly treated his injury from the territory war. However, his attention didn't last long. He made a few governmental proposals afterward, but Cassia suspects he grew tired of it. After he returned to Axios, she never saw him again. Cassia wonders if he might be more dangerous now than he was in her past life. Suddenly, there's a knock on Cassia's door, and Clara enters. Cassia, with a concerned expression, asks Clara how she's doing. Clara assures her she's fine, but then expresses her surprise that Zester didn't discuss the details of the report with her before deciding to punish Matthew. Cassia realizes that Zester's actions show consideration for Clara's feelings, sparing her from having to talk about it herself. Clara adds that Zester plans to sentence Matthew that night, and his subordinates have already informed the territory. Cassia is impressed by Zester's efficiency and reassures Clara not to worry, emphasizing that she should focus on her newfound freedom. Cassia decides she wants to attend the sentencing, curious about Zester's decision, despite Clara's suggestion to avoid it. For Cassia, witnessing justice served to someone like Matthew is a satisfying sight, and she is determined to see it through. In Grease prison, Zester arrives to collect Matthew, who looks bewildered. Zester informs him that the castle received a report of assault, and Matthew will soon be taken to the execution lot. Matthew expresses disbelief, suggesting that all couples argue occasionally. However, to Matthew's surprise, Zester reveals that the report was filed by the Baroness, Cassia. Opening the jail door, Zester advises Matthew to save his arguments for the execution lot, as he will be the judge. That night, Cassia and Clara have already arrived at the execution lot. Even Verl is present, silently mocking the place in his mind. Zester announces to everyone that he will expose the crimes committed by the accused, Matthew Holton, and administer his punishment. Zester hands the paper to Gregory, who reads out the crimes committed by Matthew. These include abandoning his wife, Clara Holton, and leaving her to support the family alone, committing adultery without regard for his wife, squandering their joint wealth, and repeatedly subjecting Clara to verbal and physical abuse. Zester then turns to Matthew, asking him if he admits to the crimes listed. Without hesitation, Matthew denies them, questioning how such things could be considered crimes. Suddenly, Lady Fleurette interjects, labeling him as a problem. She recounts how she would feel a chill down her spine every time she passed by his house and heard the sound of plates breaking, his wife's screams, and his crude language. She asserts that everyone in the village knows he's the biggest troublemaker around. The others present nod in agreement with Lady Fleurette's remarks. Matthew still tries to defend himself, arguing that what he did wasn't all that bad, just typical stuff between a husband and wife. Zester shoots him a piercing look, questioning what kind of territory allows someone to mistreat their spouse however they please. Not wanting to waste any more time, Zester turns to Gregory and instructs him that once they finish carrying out Matthew's punishment, he should personally escort him home. Zester suggests they display him for the whole village to witness, to serve as a warning against anyone else thinking of acting similarly. Gregory, taken aback, asks what exactly they're going to hang. With an intense gaze, Zester replies, Matthew's head. Everyone present, including Cassia, Clara, and Verl, is taken aback by Zester's unexpected decision. As Zester instructs Gregory to proceed with the execution, he offers Matthew a chance to speak his last words. Matthew seizes the opportunity to apologize to Clara and pledges to make things right. However, Zester detects insincerity in Matthew's words and advises him that true repentance would involve helping Clara start a new life. With that, Zester presents the divorce papers to Matthew. Cassia is stunned by this turn of events, realizing that Zester had never intended to execute Matthew from the beginning. Zester's move was pretty smart, because if he had disregarded imperial law and forced them to divorce, it could lead to problems down the road. Matthew, still shaking, signs the divorce paper with a trembling thumb, hoping it means Zester won't kill him. But Zester isn't finished yet. He points to Matthew's lower body and without hesitation, instructs Gregory to cut it off. Matthew desperately grabs Zester's robe, begging for mercy. However, all he receives is a stern stare from Zester, who emphasizes that he should never mistreat his wife, as she should be revered like a goddess. Zester then signals to Cassia, who, feeling that the matter is settled, tells Clara it's time to go back together. And so, Gregory follows Zester's orders to carry out the punishment on Matthew, all the while echoing Zester's words about treating wife like a god. In her room, Cassia waits for Zester, who's taking longer than she anticipated. Finally, Zester enters after freshening up. He asks Cassia if he handled things well. Seeing Zester's expression, Cassia can't help but chuckle. She wonders if this is the same guy who ordered a beheading with such intense eyes. Moving closer, she gently kisses Zester's forehead, telling him he did an excellent job.